Close your eyes gently and take a deep, slow breath. Feel the air filling your lungs, calm and cool. As you exhale, let go of the tensions of today, the worries of tomorrow. Tonight, we embark on a peaceful journey together, traveling back through the mists of time, to when our ancestors walked beneath the same stars that shine above us now. Imagine, if you will, a world untouched by cities and roads, a world where the night sky blazed with millions of stars, unpolluted by artificial light, where the songs of wolves echoed through ancient forests and the footsteps of our ancestors marked trails that would endure for millennia. Each curiosity we explore tonight is like a small window into that distant past, a gentle whisper carried across thousands of generations, speaking to us of love, ingenuity, courage, and the remarkable human spirit that has always burned within us. These are not just facts. They are stories of real people who laughed, who loved, who dreamed under those ancient skies. So settle into comfort. Let your body sink deeper into relaxation. And as we journey together through these 50 remarkable discoveries about our prehistoric family, allow yourself to drift peacefully, carried by the gentle current of history itself. Let us begin. Curiosity 1. The larger prehistoric brain. Our first discovery takes us to something quite unexpected. When we think of human evolution, we often imagine a steady progression toward larger, more sophisticated brains. And while this is partially true, there's a fascinating twist to this story that might surprise you. Prehistoric humans, particularly those who lived between 30,000 and 10,000 years ago, actually possessed brains that were slightly larger than ours today. Not dramatically so, but measurably larger. When archaeologists and paleoanthropologists examined the skulls of our Cro-Magnon ancestors, they discovered cranial capacities that averaged around 1,400 cubic centimeters, compared to our modern average of about 1,350. But before you worry that we've somehow devolved, let me guide you through the peaceful waters of understanding this phenomenon. You see, brain size alone doesn't determine intelligence or capability. What matters more is the organization and efficiency of the brain's networks, the connections between neurons, and how information is processed. Imagine a vast library. One library might be enormous, with towering shelves reaching toward the ceiling, filled with millions of books scattered in random order. Another library might be smaller, but every book is perfectly catalogued, cross-referenced, and instantly accessible. Which library is truly more functional? Our modern brains are like that second library, more efficiently organized, more specialized. Our prehistoric ancestors needed their larger brains for different purposes than we do. They lived in a world where survival demanded an incredible array of skills and knowledge. They had to remember the locations of water sources across vast territories. They needed to recognize hundreds of plant species, knowing which were edible, which were medicinal, and which were deadly. They had to read the subtle signs of weather patterns, track animals across varied terrain, and navigate by stars and landmarks with precision that would shame our modern GPS systems. Their brains were also less specialized than ours, where we might dedicate large portions of our brains to reading written language, processing abstract mathematics, or navigating social media. Their neural real estate was devoted to survival skills that most of us have lost. The portion of the brain dedicated to processing visual information from the environment was more developed. Their ability to detect movement, judge distances, and perceive subtle changes in their surroundings was extraordinary. Think about this for a moment. As you rest comfortably, somewhere in your ancestry, perhaps 200 generations ago, one of your direct ancestors stood on a hillside at dawn, their slightly larger brain processing the world around them with incredible acuity. They could hear the rustle of an animal in underbrush 100 meters away. They could smell rain approaching hours before it arrived. They could remember every stone, every tree, every turn in a path they had walked only once before, years earlier. This larger brain came at a cost, however. The human brain, despite being only about 2% of body weight, consumes roughly 20% of our energy. A larger brain requires more calories, more resources. As humans began to develop agriculture, settle in communities, and create systems of knowledge storage like writing, we no longer needed to carry all that information in our individual brains. We could specialize. We could record knowledge externally. Over thousands of generations, there was actually a slight selective pressure for slightly smaller, more efficient brains. Those who could thrive with less caloric demand had an advantage in times of scarcity. But this doesn't mean we became less intelligent. Rather, we became differently intelligent, trading some forms of spatial and sensory processing for enhanced abilities in abstract thinking, language processing, and social cognition. As you drift deeper into relaxation, consider this beautiful continuity that prehistoric ancestor, with their larger brain standing under the stars, is connected to you by an unbroken chain of life. Their DNA flows through you. Their ability to adapt, to survive, to think and dream, is part of your inheritance. When you navigate a new place and somehow find your way, when you spot something others miss, when you feel that instinctive connection to nature, you're experiencing echoes of that ancient, magnificent brain that helped your ancestors thrive in a world so different from ours, yet in many ways exactly the same. Sleep peacefully, knowing that the story of human cognition is not one of simple progression, but of elegant adaptation. Our brains, whether slightly larger or smaller, have always been miraculous organs, sculpted by time and experience into precisely what we needed them to be. Curiosity 2, running barefoot across any terrain. Let us journey now to the feet of our ancestors, those remarkable foundations that carried humanity across continents, over mountains, through valleys and plains. Close your eyes and imagine for a moment what it would feel like to run completely barefoot across rough terrain. For most of us, the thought brings discomfort. Sharp rocks, thorns, hot sand, cold stone. Yet our prehistoric ancestors did this every single day of their lives, and not just walked, but ran with grace and speed that would astonish us. The human foot is an evolutionary masterpiece, a complex structure of 26 bones, 33 joints, and more than 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. But over the millennia since we began wearing shoes, especially modern cushioned shoes, our feet have changed. They've softened. The thick, protective skin that once covered the soles of prehistoric feet, skin that could be half an inch thick in places, has thinned. The natural arch support, once maintained by strong, active muscles, has weakened in many people. We've traded adaptation for protection, and in doing so, lost something remarkable. Archaeological evidence and studies of modern hunter-gatherer populations who still go barefoot show us what we've lost. The feet of prehistoric humans were extraordinarily tough and adaptive. From childhood, going barefoot every day created a natural callus that was thick yet flexible, providing protection without sacrificing sensitivity. This might seem contradictory, but think of it this way. A master guitarist develops calluses on their fingertips that are tough enough to press steel strings without pain, yet sensitive enough to feel the subtlest vibration. The prehistoric foot was similar. But it wasn't just toughness. The biomechanics of barefoot running are fundamentally different from shod running. When we run in modern shoes, especially those with elevated heels and cushioning, we tend to strike the ground with our heels first. This sends a shock wave up through the ankle, knee, hip, and spine. Our shoes absorb some of this impact, but not all. Prehistoric humans, running barefoot, naturally adopted a forefoot or midfoot strike. They landed on the ball of the foot first, allowing the natural spring of the arch and the flex of the ankle to absorb impact forces. This wasn't something they learned consciously. It was simply the natural way to run without pain. If you've ever tried running barefoot on pavement and landed on your heel, you understand immediately why this doesn't work. The sharp pain teaches you instantly. Our ancestors learned this as children, and by adulthood, their running form was perfected through thousands of miles of practice. Imagine a young prehistoric hunter, perhaps 18 years old, participating in what anthropologists call persistence hunting. This ancient technique involved tracking an animal, perhaps an antelope or deer, for hours under the hot sun. The animal, faster in short bursts, would run away. But humans have a unique advantage. We can regulate our body temperature through sweating far more effectively than most mammals. The hunter would follow at a steady pace, reading tracks, predicting the animal's path. The animal would run, stop, rest, and run again. The human would jog, steadily, relentlessly, barefoot across sand, rock, grass, and soil. This hunt might last 4 hours, 6 hours, even 8 hours. The hunter's feet would carry them perhaps 20 or 30 miles, across scorching sand, where the temperature might reach 140 degrees Fahrenheit, across sharp volcanic rock, through thorny scrub brush, over smooth river stones. And at the end of this journey, those feet would be tired but not injured. No blisters, no tears, no breaks. How? The thick corlu's skin provided a barrier. The perfect running form distributed forces naturally. The lifetime of adaptation meant every tendon, every muscle, every bone had strengthened to handle these stresses. But perhaps most remarkably, the sensitivity remained. Even through that thick protective layer, a prehistoric human could feel the ground beneath them with incredible precision. They could detect the subtle difference between firm and soft soil, could sense the approach of a sharp stone and adjust their stride, could feel the texture that indicated they were moving from one type of terrain to another. This sensory feedback was crucial for navigation and survival. In darkness or heavy fog, when visual cues were limited, the feet provided essential information about the environment. The feel of a particular type of stone or soil could confirm you were on the right path. Changes in terrain could warn of approaching dangers, cliffs, or water. Modern studies have tried to understand this remarkable ability. Research with habitually barefoot populations has shown that their feet develop not just thicker skin, but a different kind of skin. The structure of the tissue is more densely layered, more elastic. It's not like a rigid boot sole, but more like a thick, flexible glove. This allows for both protection and sensation, protection and flexibility. The muscles of the foot also develop differently. In shod populations, the intrinsic muscles of the foot, those small muscles that control the toes and support the arch, often weaken because shoes do some of their work. In barefoot populations, these muscles remain strong throughout life. This provides natural arch support, reduces the risk of conditions like plantar fasciitis, and creates a foot that is more stable and adaptable. The toes themselves are different too. Without shoes constraining them, the toes of prehistoric humans could spread widely, providing a broader, more stable base. The big toe, that most important toe for balance and push-off during walking and running, could articulate independently, almost like a thumb. This provided additional grip on uneven surfaces and helped with climbing. Speaking of climbing, prehistoric humans were far more adept at this than most of us today. Their feet could grip and mold around branches, roots, and rocks. Combined with strong hands and arms, this made them excellent climbers, able to access food sources in trees, escape ground predators, and navigate vertical terrain that would challenge us severely. As you rest now, feeling the comfort of wherever you lie, consider the journey your own feet have made in your lifetime. Every step you've taken has been cushioned, protected, guided by shoes. This isn't wrong. It's the world we've created, and shoes protect us from the glass, metal, and harsh surfaces of modern life. But somewhere in your genetic memory lives the blueprint for those ancient, remarkable feet. Those feet that could carry you anywhere, across any terrain, feeling the earth directly with every step. There's something profound in this connection to the ground, something our ancestors knew intimately. The earth wasn't something to be separated from, but something to be in constant contact with. Every step was a conversation between foot and ground, an exchange of information and sensation. They didn't just walk on the earth, they walked with it, reading its stories through the soles of their feet. Rest now, and dream perhaps of walking barefoot on soft grass, of feeling cool morning dew between your toes, of the simple pleasure of skin against earth. This connection is part of our human heritage, a sensory experience that our ancestors knew with every step of their lives. Curiosity 3. The larger eyes of Neanderthals. As we continue our gentle journey through time, we come now to our cousins, the Neanderthals. These remarkable humans who lived in Europe and Asia from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago have captured our imagination for over a century. Often misunderstood and underestimated in the past, we now know that Neanderthals were sophisticated, intelligent, and in many ways quite similar to us. Yet there were differences, fascinating differences that tell us about adaptation and survival in different environments. One of these differences was in their eyes. Neanderthal eye sockets, those bony orbits in the skull that house the eyes, were measurably larger than those of modern humans. When anthropologists first noticed this, they wondered, what does this tell us? Why would our Neanderthal cousins need larger eyes? To understand this, we must travel to the Ice Age Europe where Neanderthals lived. Picture, if you will, a landscape unlike any you might know today. Vast glaciers covering the northern reaches. Long, dark winters, where the sun barely rose above the horizon. Dense forests interspersed with open tundra. A world that was often dim, often shadowed, where light was precious, and seeing clearly could mean the difference between eating and going hungry, between safety and danger. Larger eyes capture more light. This is a fundamental principle of optics. Think of the pupil of the eye as a window gathering photons, those tiny particles of light that allow us to see. A larger window gathers more light, just as a larger lens on a camera can capture images in dimmer conditions. The Neanderthals, living in higher latitudes where winter days were short and summer nights were long, would have benefited enormously from enhanced vision in low-light conditions. But the story is more nuanced than simply bigger eyes equal better night vision. The size and shape of the Neanderthal skull suggests that more of their brain was dedicated to visual processing as well. There's a region at the back of the brain, the occipital lobe, where visual information is processed. In Neanderthals, this area appears to have been proportionally larger, so they had both better light-gathering apparatus and more brain power dedicated to making sense of visual information. Imagine being a Neanderthal hunter on a winter evening. The sun has set, but the hunt is not yet over. In the dim twilight, you need to track an animal through the forest. Shadows are long. Details are obscured, but your large eyes gather every available photon of light. Your enhanced visual cortex processes this information rapidly. Where others might see only darkness and vague shapes, you see definition, movement, the telltale signs of your prey. Or picture a Neanderthal mother in a cave. In the dim light of a small fire, she's working on a delicate task, perhaps sewing hide with a bone needle, threading sinew through tiny holes. The firelight flickers, but her eyes adapt. She can see what she's doing with remarkable clarity, even in these conditions where we might struggle. This adaptation came at a potential cost. However, some researchers suggest that having more brain devoted to visual processing might have meant slightly less brain available for other functions, perhaps social cognition or language. This is speculative and hotly debated in the scientific community, but it raises interesting questions about the trade-offs involved in evolution. What isn't debated is that Neanderthals were highly successful for hundreds of thousands of years. They survived ice ages, hunted massive game like mammoths and woolly rhinoceros, created sophisticated tools, cared for their sick and elderly, and even created art. Their larger eyes were part of a suite of adaptations that made them perfectly suited to their environment. When we look at modern humans, particularly those populations whose ancestors have lived at high latitudes for many generations, we see some similar adaptations, though less pronounced. Arctic populations often have features that protect the eyes from harsh glare and cold, though not necessarily larger eyes. This reminds us that there are many paths to solving the challenges of environment. The story of Neanderthal eyes also tells us something beautiful about human diversity and adaptation. When modern humans and Neanderthals encountered each other, likely around 50 to 60,000 years ago, they didn't see each other as completely alien. In fact, we know they interbred. Many people of European and Asian descent today carry Neanderthal DNA, typically between 1 and 4% of their genome. Every time you look in the mirror, if you're among those with Neanderthal ancestry, you're looking at a face that carries echoes of those ancient people with their large, keen eyes. Close your own eyes now and rest them. In our modern world, we strain our eyes constantly, staring at screens, reading fine print, focusing on things in the near field far more than our ancestors ever did. Prehistoric humans, whether Neanderthals or modern humans, used their eyes differently. They spent most of their time looking at distant vistas, scanning horizons, tracking movement across landscapes. Their eyes were constantly adjusting between near and far, dark and light, motion and stillness. This variety of visual experience kept their eyes healthy and strong. Perhaps this is something we can learn from our ancestors. To give our eyes rest and variety, to look at distant things, to spend time in natural light, to allow our eyes to do what they evolved to do, rather than forcing them into the narrow range of tasks that modern life demands. As you drift towards sleep, imagine looking through those Neanderthal eyes for a moment, standing on a hillside at dusk, watching the landscape fade from color to shades of gray, but still seeing everything clearly: the shapes of trees, the movement of clouds, the path of a stream, all visible in the gathering darkness. There's a peace in that vision, a connection to the natural world that comes from perfect adaptation to your environment. The Neanderthals knew that peace for hundreds of thousands of years, and in a small way, through the DNA that some of us carry, through the wonder we feel when we learn about them, we can touch that ancient peace ourselves. Curiosity 4. The first burial with flowers. Our journey now takes us to one of the most emotionally moving discoveries in all of archaeology. We travel to a cave in northern Iraq, a site called Shanidar Cave, where in the 1950s, archaeologists made a discovery that would forever change our understanding of prehistoric humans and their emotional lives. They found a burial that was approximately 60 to 70,000 years old, far older than previously known ceremonial burials. But what made this discovery truly extraordinary was the evidence of flowers. When you think of a funeral today, you likely picture flowers. They're a universal symbol of love, respect, and remembrance. We place flowers on graves, send them to memorial services, use them to honor those who have passed. This practice feels timeless, feels essentially human. But until the discovery at Shanidar Cave, we didn't know just how timeless it truly was. The burial at Shanidar was of a Neanderthal man, carefully laid to rest in a deliberate position. But surrounding his remains, buried with him in the earth, were the remains of flowers. The evidence came from pollen analysis, a painstaking scientific process where archaeologists examine soil samples under microscopes, identifying the tiny preserved pollen grains that remain long after the flowers themselves have decayed. The pollen told a story. This person had been buried with flowers from at least 7 different species of plants. Let's pause here and consider what this means. Someone 60 to 70,000 years ago grieved. Someone felt loss so profoundly that they wanted to honor the dead with beauty. Someone noticed flowers, thought them appropriate for this solemn occasion, and took the time to gather them. This wasn't about survival. This wasn't about food or shelter or safety. This was about something deeper, something that speaks to the core of what it means to be human, the capacity to love, to mourn, and to seek comfort in beauty during times of sorrow. The flowers chosen weren't random either. Many of the species identified had medicinal properties, were known to ancient peoples as healing plants. Some scholars speculate that these weren't just decorative choices, but symbolic ones. Perhaps there was a belief that these healing plants could help in some spiritual way, could ease the transition from life to death, or could protect the deceased in whatever came after. Imagine the scene, and let it unfold gently in your mind as you relax. A Neanderthal community has lost one of their own. Perhaps it was an elder, someone who had lived a long life and carried invaluable knowledge. Perhaps it was a hunter who died in an accident. Perhaps it was a mother taken too soon. The community grieves. They feel that universal human pain of loss, that emptiness where a presence used to be. They prepare the body carefully, with reverence. They choose a spot in the cave, a place that feels right, as they lay the body to rest. Someone, perhaps several people, go out into the landscape surrounding the cave. It's spring or summer. When flowers bloom, they walk through meadows, along stream banks, into the forest. They see the bright purple of grape hyacinth, the yellow of St. John's wort, the white of yarrow. They gather these flowers, armfuls of them, stems and blooms still fresh. They return to the cave. Perhaps they place the flowers under the body, creating a bed of petals. Perhaps they scatter them around, surrounding the deceased with color and fragrance. Perhaps they lay them on top, a blanket of blossoms, in the cool, stable environment of the cave. In that moment before the earth is placed over everything, there is beauty, there is care, there is love made visible. The discovery at Shanidar Cave was initially controversial. Some scientists questioned whether the pollen might have gotten there through other means, perhaps carried by rodents or wind. This skepticism is healthy in science, important for ensuring we don't jump to conclusions. But further analysis, additional discoveries at other sites, and our growing understanding of Neanderthal culture have strengthened the interpretation. Neanderthals did bury their dead with ceremony. They did include flowers and other offerings. They did mourn. This tells us something profound about the Neanderthal mind and spirit. They had symbolic thinking. They had the capacity for abstract thought, for imagining something beyond the immediate and visible. They had complex emotions and the ability to express those emotions through ritual. They were, in every meaningful sense, people, not primitives, not brutish, but thinking, feeling individuals with rich inner lives. The practice of burial itself, even without flowers, is significant. Many animals show distress when a member of their group dies. Elephants, dolphins, primates. They linger with the dead. They seem to grieve. But burial is different. Burial requires an understanding of death as a transformation, a belief that how you treat the body matters. It requires coordination, community effort, and shared meaning. The fact that Neanderthals were doing this 70,000 years ago pushes back our understanding of when these capacities emerged. And flowers specifically, what a choice. They're ephemeral, lasting only briefly, even when fresh. They're beautiful but fragile. They're not practical in the way that, say, burying someone with tools or food might be. Flowers are pure symbolism, pure emotion made manifest. They say, we cared. We valued beauty. We wanted your last journey to be surrounded by loveliness. This discovery also reminds us that death rituals are one of the defining characteristics of humanity across all cultures and all times. Every human society we know of has practices around death. The specifics vary enormously, from burials to cremations, from elaborate monuments to simple markers, from silent processions to joyful celebrations of life. But the core is universal. We mark death, we honor it, we create meaning around it. Knowing that this practice extends back not just thousands but tens of thousands of years, and that it was practiced not just by our direct Homo sapiens ancestors, but also by Neanderthals, gives us a profound sense of continuity. When you attend a funeral today, when you send flowers to someone who is grieving, when you stand by a grave and feel that mix of sorrow and love, you are participating in something ancient beyond measure. You are connected to that unnamed Neanderthal who gathered flowers in a prehistoric meadow, moved by the same emotions, seeking comfort in the same symbols. As you rest now, perhaps you can send a thought across those vast thousands of years, a thought of connection to all those who came before us, who loved and lost, who found ways to express their grief and honor their dead. Death is universal, but so is love. So is the impulse to mark life's ending with beauty. In this we are all linked, one unbroken chain of humanity extending back through time, all the way to those flowers carefully placed in a cave 60,000 years ago. Sleep peacefully, knowing that the capacity for love, for beauty, for honoring what matters, has been with humanity since the very beginning. These aren't modern inventions, but ancient inheritances, gifts passed down through countless generations. And they remind us that even in the face of death, humans have always chosen beauty, always chosen to say, with flowers or stones or songs or tears, this life mattered. This person was loved. Curiosity 5. Enhanced sense of smell. Let us continue our peaceful journey with a curiosity about one of the most primal and evocative of our senses, smell. In our modern world, we rarely think about smell as a crucial sense. We navigate primarily by sight, communicate primarily through sound and written language. Our sense of smell often recedes into the background, noticed mainly when something smells particularly good or particularly bad. But for our prehistoric ancestors, smell was a vital tool for survival, and their ability to detect and interpret odors was dramatically more developed than ours. The human nose contains millions of olfactory receptor neurons, specialized cells that detect odor molecules in the air. These neurons send signals to the olfactory bulb in the brain, which processes and interprets smells. In prehistoric humans, studies suggest that both the number of functional olfactory receptor genes and the size of the olfactory bulb were greater than in most modern human populations. We've essentially experienced what scientists call genetic drift in our olfactory capabilities. As smell became less crucial for survival, there was less selective pressure to maintain the full suite of olfactory abilities. Imagine, for a moment, what the world would be like if your sense of smell were 10 or 20 times more acute than it is now. This is challenging because smell is so difficult to describe in language. We have rich vocabularies for sights and sounds, but our words for smells are often borrowed from other senses or simply name the source. It smells red or loud or like roses. But try to imagine it anyway. A prehistoric human stepping out of their shelter in the morning wouldn't just see the dawn. They would smell it. The changing chemistry of the air as it warms, the release of volatile compounds from plants as sunlight touches them, the lingering scent of the night-blooming flowers closing their petals. The air would be rich with information. Walking through a forest, they would smell each type of tree distinctly. The sharp, clean scent of pines, the warm, sweet smell of cedar, the slightly musty odor of oaks. They would smell water from a considerable distance, not just the generic wet smell we might notice, but distinctions between a stagnant pond, a flowing stream, a marsh, or the sea. Each has its own olfactory signature, its own chemical fingerprint in the air. They would smell animals with extraordinary precision, not just that a deer had passed by, but how long ago, from the strength and character of the scent, whether it was male or female, from hormonal cues in the scent, whether it was healthy or sick, young or old. A skilled prehistoric tracker could follow a scent trail that would be completely undetectable to us, reading the story of an animal's passage through pure smell. They would smell people too with far more acuity than we do. Each person has a unique scent, as distinct as their fingerprint, composed of their diet, their health, their emotional state, their genetic makeup. In prehistoric communities, people would recognize each other as much by scent as by sight. A mother could identify her child in complete darkness by smell alone. Friends and family had familiar, comforting scents. Strangers smelled different, immediately identifiable as not part of the group. This might seem invasive to our modern sensibilities, where we often try to mask our natural scents with soaps and perfumes and deodorants. But in the prehistoric world, these natural scents were part of identity, part of communication. Fear has a smell, released through sweat when adrenaline surges. Anger, excitement, contentment, illness, all produce subtle chemical changes that can be detected through smell. A prehistoric community would be unconsciously reading these emotional and physical states in each other all the time, creating a layer of communication beyond words. The sense of smell is also intimately connected to memory in a unique way. The olfactory bulb has direct connections to the amygdala and hippocampus, brain structures involved in emotion and memory. This is why certain smells can trigger vivid memories and powerful emotions. The smell of a perfume can transport you instantly to a specific moment in your past. The smell of baking bread might recall your grandmother's kitchen. This connection is ancient and powerful. For prehistoric humans, this meant that scent memories were incredibly strong. They could remember the smell of specific places, specific seasons, specific events with perfect clarity years later. A particular combination of plant smells might mean water source, half day's walk east. The smell of certain flowers might mean berries will be ripe here in 2 weeks. The smell of smoke with particular characteristics might mean another tribe lives in that direction. They could also detect danger through smell, the musky scent of a predator, even if it was far away or hidden. The smell of decay, warning of disease or death. The acrid smell of forest fire. Long before it was visible, poisonous plants often have distinctive smells. Recognizing these could prevent fatal mistakes. Consider also the role of smell in finding food. Many edible plants release aromatic compounds, especially fruits and herbs. A prehistoric human could smell ripe fruit from remarkable distances, could distinguish between different types of nuts and roots, could detect the subtle difference between an edible mushroom and a toxic one through scent alone. When hunting, they could smell when an animal was nearby, even upwind, from the faint traces carried on swirling breezes. The loss of olfactory acuity in modern humans isn't uniform across all populations. Interestingly, studies have shown that people who grow up in environments where smell is still important, such as some indigenous populations who still practice traditional hunting and gathering, tend to have better olfactory abilities than those of us who live in cities. This suggests that smell is partly a use it or lose it sense. The capability is still there in our genes, but without training and practice, it remains undeveloped. There's also interesting research showing that pregnancy can temporarily enhance a woman's sense of smell, perhaps an evolutionary adaptation to help detect potential dangers to the developing fetus, like spoiled food or toxic substances. This gives us a small window into what prehistoric levels of olfactory acuity might have been like, a glimpse of our ancestral capabilities. In our modern world, we've traded some of this olfactory richness for other capabilities. We can read, accessing vast stores of information visually. We can communicate across great distances instantly. We can analyze and abstract in ways that might have been beyond prehistoric humans. But we've lost something too. We've lost that direct, immediate emotional connection to our environment that comes through smell. We move through the world somewhat cut off from a whole dimension of sensory experience that our ancestors knew intimately. As you lie here, relaxing, becoming aware of your breathing, perhaps take a moment to notice what you can smell. Maybe it's very little. Maybe just the familiar scent of your room or your bed. Maybe you can smell something cooking, or the night air, or a flower. Whatever it is, try to pay attention to it, really notice it. This is a small exercise in reclaiming that ancient sense, in reconnecting with a part of your sensory heritage. Imagine walking through a prehistoric landscape with that enhanced sense of smell. Every breath brings information, tells stories, connects you to your environment in profound ways. The world isn't just something you move through visually, but something you're constantly tasting, constantly reading through scent. You're never truly lost because you can smell your way home. You're never truly alone because you can smell your family, your tribe, your community. There's a poetry in this, a beauty in being so intimately connected to the world through all your senses, not just the ones we prioritize today. Prehistoric humans weren't just in nature. They were of nature, part of an interconnected web of life that they perceived through every sense with extraordinary depth. As you drift towards sleep, let the concept of scent comfort you. Throughout your life, certain smells have been anchors of safety and peace. The smell of home, wherever that has been for you, the smell of people you love, the smell of rain on earth, of forests, of ocean, of bread baking, of coffee brewing. These smells are connected to your deepest memories, your strongest emotions. This is your inheritance from those ancestors with their acute noses, this powerful link between scent and memory, between smell and emotion. Even though your nose may not be as sensitive as theirs, that connection remains, that ancient pathway from smell to feeling to memory, unchanged across thousands of generations. Rest now, breathing gently, and know that with every breath, you're participating in one of the most ancient of human experiences. Breath connects us to the world, brings the world inside us, molecule by molecule. Our prehistoric ancestors knew this intimately. And so, in your own way, breathing in this moment, do you. Curiosity 6. Extended breastfeeding until age 5 or 6. As we continue our gentle exploration of prehistoric life, we come now to a topic that speaks to the very essence of human nurture and care. The relationship between mother and child, specifically the practice of extended breastfeeding. In our modern world, the duration of breastfeeding varies widely by culture and personal choice, but it typically ranges from a few months to perhaps 2 years. However, evidence from prehistoric populations suggests that our ancestors commonly breastfed their children until the age of 5 or 6 years old, sometimes even longer. This might seem surprising at first, but when we consider the context of prehistoric life, it makes profound sense. Let's explore this practice gently and understand its place in the ancient world and what it tells us about prehistoric childhood, nutrition, and the bonds of family. The evidence for extended breastfeeding comes from multiple sources. One of the most revealing is the analysis of ancient teeth. As children grow and their baby teeth develop, the composition of the tooth enamel reflects their diet. Breast milk has a distinctive chemical signature, particularly in its ratios of certain isotopes. By analyzing the teeth of prehistoric children who didn't survive to adulthood, a sad but scientifically valuable source of information, researchers can track when children were weaned, time and again. This analysis shows weaning ages much later than we might expect, consistently in the range of 4 to 6 years. But why? What were the advantages of this extended nursing period? To understand, we must first appreciate that breast milk is not merely food, it's a complete nutritional package, perfectly adapted to human needs, changing its composition as the child grows to provide exactly what they require at each stage. It contains not just calories and nutrients, but antibodies, immune factors, growth hormones, and even, recent research suggests, beneficial bacteria and prebiotics that help establish a healthy gut microbiome. In the prehistoric world, where food could be scarce and unpredictable, breast milk provided nutritional security. A drought might limit plant foods. A harsh winter might make hunting difficult. But as long as the mother herself had enough to eat to maintain lactation, her child had a reliable source of high-quality nutrition. This could quite literally mean the difference between survival and starvation during difficult times. The immune protection was equally crucial. Prehistoric children faced constant exposure to pathogens, bacteria, and viruses and parasites that our modern sanitation and medical care have largely eliminated from children's lives today. Breast milk provided passive immunity, antibodies from the mother protecting the child from infections. The longer a child was breastfed, the longer they received this crucial protection while their own immune systems matured and learned to defend against the local disease environment. Think about this from a deeply human perspective. Setting aside the nutritional and medical aspects for a moment, imagine being a child in the prehistoric world. Your existence is so different from a modern child's life. There are no schools, no playgrounds, no toys, mass-produced in factories. Your world is the natural environment, vast and sometimes frightening. There are predators, real ones, not just stories in books. There are dangers, from cliff edges to fast rivers to poisonous plants. In this world, your mother is your absolute anchor of safety. Her presence means warmth, food, comfort, protection. The act of nursing is not just about nutrition, but about connection, reassurance, love. It's a moment of pause in a busy day, a return to that primal safety. For 5, 6, even 7 years, whenever you feel scared or hurt or tired or uncertain, you can return to your mother, literally draw sustenance and comfort from her body, and be reminded that you are safe, you are loved, you are not alone. For the mother, extended breastfeeding had its own advantages and challenges. On the advantage side, breastfeeding naturally spaces births. Frequent nursing suppresses ovulation in many women, though not reliably enough to be considered a contraceptive method by modern standards. But in the prehistoric world, where each pregnancy and birth carried significant risks, where resources were limited, and where caring for multiple very young children simultaneously would be extremely challenging, natural child spacing would have been beneficial. Women who nursed for extended periods typically had children spaced 3 to 5 years apart, allowing each child to reach a degree of independence before the next infant arrived. This spacing also meant that the family unit could better support each child. In a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which is how most prehistoric humans lived, mobility is important. A woman cannot easily travel long distances while carrying 2 infants, but a woman with a 5-year-old who can walk independently and a newborn is in a very different situation. The older child can contribute in small ways, can learn by watching and participating, while the younger is still completely dependent. Of course, extended breastfeeding wasn't without its challenges. It required significant caloric investment from the mother. Producing breast milk burns calories, lots of them. A lactating mother might need an extra 500 to 700 calories per day. In a world where obtaining food was labor-intensive and sometimes uncertain, this was no small matter. It meant that the mother needed to prioritize her own nutrition, and it meant that the community needed to support her, ensuring she had access to adequate food. Here we see the importance of communal living arrangements. Prehistoric humans lived in extended family groups, small tribes of perhaps 20 to 150 individuals. Within these groups, food was shared, childcare was communal, and support systems existed. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, other mothers, all contributed to the care of children. This allowed mothers to rest, to feed themselves well, to have help with the many tasks of daily survival, while still maintaining lactation. Interestingly, while the biological mother was typically the primary nursing figure, some traditional societies practiced what's called cross-nursing or wet nursing, where women would occasionally nurse each other's children. This provided flexibility if a mother needed to be away for extended periods, or if one mother had more milk than her child needed, while another struggled with supply. We don't know for certain how common this was in prehistory, but the practice is old enough and widespread enough that it likely has ancient roots. The transition from nursing child to fully weaned child was gradual. It's not as if a child nursed exclusively until 6 years old and then stopped completely. Rather, as children grew, they began eating other foods, first softened and pre-chewed by parents, later prepared in ways they could manage themselves. Nursing became less frequent, shifting from the primary food source to a supplementary one, and finally to occasional comfort nursing before ending entirely. This gradual transition allowed the child to adapt psychologically and physically, and it allowed the mother's milk production to decrease naturally without the discomfort of abrupt weaning. From a developmental psychology perspective, extended nursing provided a secure base from which a child could explore. Attachment theory, developed in the mid-20th century, but describing patterns that are ancient, tells us that children who have secure attachments to their caregivers are actually more confident in exploring their environment. They know they can return to safety. The extended nursing period reinforced this secure attachment during years when the child was increasingly mobile and curious, but still quite vulnerable. There's also an interesting linguistic connection here. In many languages, including ancient ones, we can partially reconstruct words for mother and words for breast or milk share etymological roots. This reminds us how fundamental this relationship was to human existence. The mother was literally the source of life, not just at birth, but continuously for years afterward. As you rest now, perhaps you can appreciate this profound bond across time. Every person who has ever lived was once an infant, dependent on care for survival. For most of human history, were nursed for years. This extended infancy and childhood is actually one of the distinguishing features of human evolution. Compared to other primates, human children remain dependent for a remarkably long time. But this long dependency allows for extensive learning, complex brain development, and the transmission of vast amounts of cultural knowledge. The prehistoric mother, nursing her 5-year-old, wasn't being overly indulgent or unusual. She was following a pattern that made sense for her time, her environment, her understanding of how to give her child the best chance at life. That child, feeling the comfort of their mother's presence, the familiar taste and warmth of mother's milk, the security of that physical connection, was building the psychological foundation for a healthy, confident life. In our modern world, we make different choices, and that's appropriate for our different circumstances. But understanding this aspect of prehistoric life gives us a window into the depth of maternal care, the importance of the mother-child bond, and the remarkable flexibility of human infant feeding practices. It also reminds us that what seems normal is often just what we're accustomed to in our particular time and place. Throughout history, across cultures, humans have found many ways to successfully raise children. Extended nursing was one such way, tested and proven over hundreds of thousands of years. Let this knowledge bring you peace as you drift towards sleep. The love between parent and child, the desire to nurture and protect, the willingness to give of oneself so that the next generation can thrive. These are among the most ancient and powerful of human drives. They've persisted unchanged through all of human history, from the first humans to today, from prehistoric mothers nursing their children in caves to modern parents, caring for their families in cities and towns around the world. This continuity, this endless chain of love and care, is one of the most beautiful aspects of being human. Rest now, cradled in the knowledge that you too were once cared for with that ancient devotion, that you too have been on the receiving end of love that stretches back through countless generations. Sleep peacefully, as securely as a prehistoric child in their mother's arms, safe and loved under the same stars that shine today as they did tens of thousands of years ago. Curiosity 7. Life Expectancy Paradox. As we continue through the night on our journey of discovery, we come now to an intriguing paradox about prehistoric life expectancy, a curiosity that challenges some common assumptions and reveals unexpected truths about the lives of our ancient ancestors. When we think of prehistoric humans, we often imagine short, brutal lives, cut off in youth by disease, injury, or predation. And while it's true that life was challenging, the reality is more nuanced and more hopeful than this bleak picture suggests. The commonly cited statistic is that prehistoric humans had a life expectancy of 30 to 40 years. This number appears in many textbooks, many popular articles, and has become embedded in our collective understanding. But like many statistics, it tells only part of the story. To understand what this really means, we need to think carefully about what life expectancy actually measures and what it doesn't measure. Life expectancy at birth is an average. It's calculated by taking all the deaths in a population and averaging the age at which they occurred. In prehistoric populations, infant and child mortality was heartbreakingly high. Perhaps 30 to 40% of children died before reaching their 5th birthday, victims of infections, accidents, birth complications, or other dangers that modern medicine has largely conquered. These early deaths, when averaged with adult deaths, dramatically pull down the overall life expectancy figure. But here's the fascinating and often overlooked truth. If you survived childhood in the prehistoric world, if you made it past those dangerous early years, your chances of living to 60, 70, or even 80 years old were surprisingly good. The life expectancy statistic obscures this by lumping together the many children who died young with the adults who could and did live long lives. Think of it this way. Imagine a population where half of all children die before age 5, but the half who survive live to be 70. The average life expectancy would be around 37 years. But this doesn't mean people were old at 37. It means that getting through childhood was the major challenge, and once cleared, people lived lives not dramatically shorter than our own. Evidence for this comes from multiple sources. In archaeological sites where age at death can be determined, whether from skeletal analysis or in later periods from burial practices and grave goods, we consistently find remains of clearly elderly individuals. Anthropologists can determine age at death from various skeletal markers: dental wear, bone density, arthritis, fusion of skull sutures, and other changes that occur with aging. These analyses show that every prehistoric population studied included people who lived into their 60s, 70s, and occasionally beyond. There are cave paintings and carvings that appear to show elderly individuals, depicted with wrinkles, bent postures, and other signs of age. Ancient skeletons show healed fractures, evidence of medical care and long-term survival after serious injuries. There are burials that seem to be of respected elders, interred with special care and valuable grave goods, suggesting that old age was not just achieved but honored. But let's think about what it meant to reach old age in the prehistoric world. Without modern dentistry, elderly people often had few remaining teeth, worn down by a lifetime of chewing tough food and using their teeth as tools. Yet they survived, meaning their community supported them, preparing softer foods they could eat. Without eyeglasses, vision would have dimmed with age. Without modern medicine, arthritis and other age-related conditions would have caused pain and limited mobility. Yet they continued to live, to participate in community life, to be valued. And valued they were because elderly people in prehistoric societies served a crucial function that we can barely imagine in our modern literate world. They were the libraries, the repositories of knowledge. In a culture without writing, all knowledge had to be preserved in human memory and passed down through oral tradition. The elderly had lived through events that younger people knew only as stories. They had experienced rare phenomena like eclipses, severe droughts, harsh winters, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. They remembered what had worked and what had failed during past crises. An elder might remember where water could be found during drought, because they had lived through a similar dry spell 40 years earlier. They might know which plants bloomed in a particular rare circumstance, knowledge potentially crucial for survival. They carried the stories of the tribe, the genealogies, the traditions, the songs and dances that bound the community together. They had mastered skills through decades of practice and could teach these skills to the younger generation with patience born of experience. Imagine a prehistoric grandmother, perhaps 70 years old. Her hair is gray, her face deeply lined by sun and weather and the expressions of a lifetime. Her hands are gnarled with arthritis, but they still remember the motions of weaving baskets, of preparing hides, of identifying plants by touch alone. She sits by the fire, and the children gather around her. She tells them the story of the great storm that happened when she was a child, how the tribe survived, what they learned. She sings them songs in the old language, songs that carry practical knowledge encoded in rhythm and rhyme, which stars to follow, when to plant, how to cure leather. She is loved, respected, essential. For men too, age brought authority and respect. An elderly hunter might no longer have the strength and speed to bring down large game, but his knowledge was invaluable. He knew animal behavior, migration patterns, the subtleties of tracking. He could teach young hunters, could advise on tactics, could make strategic decisions based on decades of experience. His weathered face and scarred hands were evidence of his survival skills, proof that his teachings worked. The fact that people could reach these advanced ages tells us something important about prehistoric society. It wasn't every person for themselves. It wasn't survival of the fittest in the crude sense we sometimes imagine. It was survival of the community, survival through cooperation and mutual support. For elderly people to survive when they could no longer contribute physical labor required that younger, stronger people chose to care for them, to share food with them, to value them for what they contributed even as their physical abilities declined. This is evidence of compassion, of familial love, of social bonds that went beyond mere utility. Prehistoric humans took care of their elderly not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because those elderly individuals were family, were teachers, were living links to the past. This care wasn't always perfect. Times of extreme hardship might have tested these bonds, but the prevalence of elderly individuals in the archaeological record suggests that such care was common, not exceptional. There's a beautiful modern parallel in some contemporary hunter-gatherer societies and traditional cultures. When anthropologists study groups like the Hadza of Tanzania or the Sand of Southern Africa or various Arctic peoples, they find that elderly individuals are deeply valued and integrated into society. These living examples give us windows into how prehistoric peoples might have thought about age and elderhood. The life expectancy paradox also teaches us to be careful with statistics, to dig deeper than headline numbers. When we say prehistoric people had a life expectancy of 35 years, we're technically correct, but we're also potentially quite misleading. A more accurate statement would be prehistoric people faced high rates of infant and child mortality, but those who survived to adulthood had a reasonable chance of living to 60 or beyond. This doesn't minimize the real hardships of prehistoric life. Childbirth was dangerous for both mother and infant. Infections that would be minor today could be fatal. Accidents were common and medical care limited. People worked hard physically their entire lives, which took a toll on bodies. There was no comfortable retirement, no nursing homes, no social security. Old age came with real challenges. But it came. And when it came, it brought with it respect, wisdom, and a valued place in the community. The prehistoric world wasn't a paradise, but neither was it the nightmare of constant death and suffering that popular imagination sometimes paints. It was a human world, where people were born, grew, learned, loved, had children, aged, taught the next generation, and eventually died, hopefully having lived a full life, and leaving behind knowledge and memories in those who survived them. As you lie here in the peaceful dark, breathing slowly and deeply, feeling your body relaxing more completely with each breath, consider this: if you had been born 10,000 years ago and survived childhood, you might well have lived to be the age you are now. The humans of that ancient time were not so different from us. They had the same biological potential for longevity. What they lacked was not inherent lifespan, but the medical technology, sanitation, and nutritional security that prevent early deaths. And in some ways, if they reached old age, they might have been healthier than many elderly people today. They remained physically active throughout life, which protected against many degenerative conditions. Their diet, though sometimes scarce, was varied and natural, without processed foods. They lived in multi-generational communities with strong social bonds, which protected mental health. They had purpose, role, identity, all important for well-being in later years. So rest now, comforted by this paradox. Life in the past was hard but not hopeless. Humans have always been resilient, have always cared for each other, have always found ways to survive, and even to thrive. That 70-year-old prehistoric grandmother, telling stories by the fire, was as human as any grandmother today, living a life that was different in its details, but remarkably similar in its essence, loving and being loved, teaching and learning, finding meaning and purpose in the simple fact of being alive and being part of a community. Sleep well, and dream perhaps of sitting by that ancient fire, listening to stories told in a language you don't understand, but somehow still feel in your bones, because the love and wisdom and human connection in those stories are universal, eternal, unchanged, across all the ages of humanity. Curiosity 8. Children's toys from clay and stone. Our journey through prehistoric time brings us now to something particularly touching and human. The idea of children at play, the universal impulse toward fun, imagination, and learning through games. When we think of prehistoric life, we often focus on survival, hunting, gathering, tool-making, all very serious business. But prehistoric communities included children, lots of them, and children have always played. Archaeological discoveries give us glimpses of this play, particularly in the form of toys made from clay and stone, small objects crafted with care and clear purpose to delight a child. Let's begin with what has been found. At archaeological sites around the world, dating back thousands, and in some cases tens of thousands of years, researchers have discovered small objects that can only be understood as toys, tiny clay figurines of animals and people, smooth and worn from small hands. Miniature versions of adult tools, like little clay pots or stone axes sized for children. Balls formed from clay or tightly wrapped plant fibers. Dolls made from bone, stone, or clay, sometimes with movable limbs, sometimes with carved features, sometimes barely more than a shape that suggests a human form. These artifacts are often found in areas of settlements that seem to have been dwelling spaces, in contexts that suggest domestic life rather than ritual. They're small enough for children to handle easily. They show signs of wear consistent with frequent use, with being held, dropped, played with repeatedly, and crucially, they serve no obvious utilitarian purpose for adults. They're not tools, not decorations, not ritual objects. They're toys, plain and simple, made for and used by children. The existence of these toys tells us so much. First and most obviously, it tells us that prehistoric adults cared about their children's happiness. Making a toy takes time and effort. A parent or grandparent or older sibling who sits down to shape clay into a little animal or to carve a doll from a piece of bone is investing time they could spend on other things. They're doing this because they want to see a child smile, because they understand that play is important, because they love. But these toys weren't just about entertainment. They were also teaching tools, though probably not consciously designed as such. A child playing with a miniature clay pot is learning about the shape and function of pots. They're developing fine motor skills, learning to manipulate objects carefully. A child with a toy spear or bow is beginning to understand how these tools work, practicing motions they'll need as adults. A child with animal figurines is learning to identify different species, to understand their characteristics, to develop the observational skills crucial for hunting and tracking. Dolls, found at many prehistoric sites, are particularly fascinating. Some of these dolls are remarkably sophisticated, with articulated limbs, facial features, even clothing or decorations. The care that went into making these dolls speaks to their importance. In many traditional cultures studied by anthropologists, doll play serves several functions. For girls, though boys sometimes play with dolls too, it's preparation for childcare, practicing the skills they'll need as mothers. It's also a form of social development, as children project emotions and relationships onto their dolls, working through feelings and learning social interactions. But beyond the practical, dolls are companions. A child's doll can be a friend when other playmates aren't available, a source of comfort when scared, a patient listener for secrets and fears. In the prehistoric world where children's lives included genuine dangers and challenges, having such a companion might have been psychologically important. Archaeological discoveries at some sites include whole collections of miniature objects, suggesting elaborate imaginative play. Tiny bowls, little tools, small animals, all sized to go together, allowing a child to set up a miniature scene of domestic life or hunting or whatever their imagination suggested. This kind of play is what modern child psychologists call symbolic play, and it's considered crucial for cognitive development. The child is learning to manipulate symbols, to understand that one thing can represent another, to create narratives and scenarios. These are fundamental skills for language, for abstract thinking, for culture itself. The materials used for toys tell us about availability and ingenuity. In areas where clay was common, clay toys predominate. Near rivers or coasts with smooth stones, we find stone toys in forested regions. Wooden toys were likely common, though wood rarely survives in the archaeological record. Bone, especially from smaller animals or birds, was carved into figurines and dolls. Even materials we might not immediately think of as toy-making materials were used. Shells were strung as necklaces, bundles of grass or reeds were twisted into shapes, animal teeth were collected and played with. The making of a toy was itself likely a bonding experience, a time of teaching and connection. Picture a father sitting with his young son, showing him how to shape clay, how to smooth it, how to form it into the shape of a deer. The boy watches, tries himself, produces something crude but recognizable. The father praises the effort, helps refine the shape. The toy deer, when finished, represents not just an object, but a memory of time spent together, of lessons learned, of approval and encouragement received. Or imagine a grandmother fashioning a doll for her granddaughter, carefully forming the body, attaching arms, scratching lines to suggest a face. As she works, she talks, telling the girl about her own childhood, about dolls she had, about how to care for the doll, about how someday the girl will make dolls for her own daughters. The doll, when given, carries love, carries memory, carries the continuity of generations. Not all toys were individual possessions either. Some games required cooperation and group participation. We know from ethnographic accounts of traditional societies that children have always invented games, often mimicking adult activities. They play house, play hunting, play gathering, play ceremonies and dances. For these games, they might create props, temporary toys used in the game, and then discarded. A pile of special stones might become a pretend food cache. Sticks become spears, a circle of stones becomes a dwelling. These games served another crucial function. They integrated children into community life. Young children playing near adults could watch real activities and then imitate them in play. Older children might help with real tasks in limited ways, then expand on those tasks in their play. This gradual transition from play to real contribution was how prehistoric children learned the vast array of skills they'd need as adults. The existence of toys also implies leisure time for children. In harsh conditions where every person's labor might be needed for survival, children would have no time for play. But the archaeological record suggests that for at least some of prehistory, in at least some communities, life wasn't quite so desperate. There was time for children, to play, to imagine, to learn gradually, rather than being thrust immediately into adult responsibilities. This doesn't mean childhood was easy or carefree in the way we might hope for children today. Prehistoric children still faced dangers, still had chores, still lived in a world without modern comforts or medical care. But they also laughed, played, imagined, and had toys that were made with love by adults who cared about their happiness. One particularly poignant aspect of toy finds in archaeology is when they're discovered in children's graves. Some prehistoric burials of children include toys among the grave goods. A child buried with their doll, their clay animals, their favorite ball. This tells us that these objects were treasured, that they were seen as important enough to accompany the child even in death. It speaks to belief systems about afterlife. Yes, but more immediately, it speaks to the grief of parents who wanted their lost child to have familiar, beloved things with them. These ancient toys connect us directly to something universal in human experience. Parents today buy toys for their children, make crafts with them, want to see them happy at play. This impulse is tens of thousands of years old, unchanged across all of human history. A clay horse made for a child 5,000 years ago served the same purpose as a plastic toy today, to bring joy, to engage imagination, to facilitate learning through play. As you rest here, comfortable and peaceful, perhaps you can remember your own favorite childhood toy. Maybe it was something simple. Maybe it was something elaborate, but you probably have that memory, that connection to an object that mattered to you when you were small. That memory links you to all children throughout history, including prehistoric children who clutched their clay dolls and played with their stone animals and laughed and ran and pretended, just as children always have, just as children always will. There's something deeply comforting in this continuity. The world changes, technology advances, societies transform, but children remain children. They need play. They need imagination. They need toys and games, and time to just be young. Prehistoric parents knew this instinctively, without child development textbooks or educational theory. They knew it because they had been children once, because they loved their children, because they were human. Sleep now, and maybe dream of sitting in a prehistoric dwelling on a quiet afternoon, watching a child play with their treasured toys, totally absorbed in their imaginary world, while the adults go about their work nearby, and the sun angles through the doorway, and time moves slowly in that peaceful, eternal rhythm of everyday life that has always been at the heart of human existence. These simple clay and stone toys remind us that humans have always created beauty and joy, even from the simplest materials, even in challenging circumstances. They remind us that love and care and the desire to make children happy are not modern inventions but ancient fundamental parts of being human. And they connect us across thousands of years to prehistoric parents who, just like parents today, wanted their children to smile, to play, to grow up surrounded by love. Curiosity 9. The domestication of wolves over 30,000 years ago. As we continue our gentle exploration through prehistoric time, we come now to one of the most remarkable partnerships in all of human history. The relationship between humans and dogs. A bond that began over 30,000 years ago when our ancestors first befriended wolves. This is not just a story of animal domestication, though that alone would be impressive. This is a story of mutual affection, of two species choosing each other, of a relationship so deep and transformative that it fundamentally changed both humans and wolves forever. Take a moment to relax more deeply, to settle into complete comfort. If you've ever known a dog, ever felt that special connection that can exist between human and canine, you're touching something ancient beyond measure. The dog sleeping at your feet, or in your memory, is the inheritor of a relationship that began in the last ice age, when the world was cold and wild, and two species discovered they could thrive better together than apart. The story likely began not with deliberate domestication, but with proximity and opportunity. Imagine a prehistoric human settlement, a temporary camp where a tribe has stopped to rest, to cook food, to sleep for the night. They've had a successful hunt. There are scraps, bones with bits of meat still clinging to them. The humans eat their fill, and then, because they'll be moving on tomorrow and can't carry everything, they discard what they don't need at the edge of their camp. In the darkness beyond the fire's light, eyes watch, wolf eyes reflecting the flames. Wolves are social hunters, intelligent, curious, and adaptable. These particular wolves have learned that following human groups can be profitable. The humans produce scraps. They also drive away larger predators, and sometimes leave wounded prey that wolves can claim. But wolves are also cautious. Humans are dangerous, armed with spears and fire and stones, capable of killing wolves if they perceive them as threats. So a balance develops. The bolder wolves, the ones more comfortable near humans, get access to food. The more fearful wolves miss out. Over generations, this creates a selection pressure. Wolves that can tolerate human presence have an advantage. They eat better, survive better, raise more offspring, and those offspring inherit not just learned behaviors, but genetic tendencies toward less fearfulness. more curiosity, greater comfort, with the strange, upright, fire-making creatures. From the human side, a parallel realization develops. These wolves that hang around the camp, they're useful. They bark when other predators approach. They clean up organic waste that might otherwise attract less welcome scavengers. Their presence might actually deter more dangerous animals. And perhaps there's more. Perhaps someone, maybe a child, befriends a young wolf pup, separated from its pack, and the pup raised around humans bonds with them, becoming something different from a wild wolf. This process takes generations, many generations, but gradually, imperceptibly, wolves become dogs. It's not just behavioral change, but physical change. As the animals become domesticated, they undergo something called domestication syndrome, a suite of physical changes that appear across different species when they're domesticated. Floppy ears appear. Coats become spotted or multicolored. Instead of uniform wolf gray, tails curl. Snouts shorten slightly. Bodies become less uniform in size, with both smaller and larger individuals appearing. But more importantly, psychology changes. Domestic dogs have longer puppyhood than wolves. They retain juvenile behaviors into adulthood, a phenomenon called neoteny. They seek human attention and approval. They read human facial expressions and gestures with uncanny accuracy, better than any other species, even primates. Dogs can follow a human pointing gesture from infancy, a skill that wolves largely lack. This isn't coincidence. It's the result of thousands of generations of selection for individuals that could communicate with and understand humans. The timeline of this transformation is debated. Genetic evidence suggests that dogs diverged from wolves somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years ago, with the most likely estimates around 30,000 years. This means that as far back as the Upper Paleolithic, as humans were painting cave walls and carving figurines and surviving the last ice age, they were doing so with dogs beside them. Archaeological evidence supports this ancient partnership. We find burials where humans are interred with dogs, suggesting deep emotional bonds. We find remains of dogs at human settlements, sometimes showing signs of healed injuries, meaning they were cared for even when injured, not just discarded. We find specialized tools that might have been used for dog care or training. We find artwork depicting dogs, clearly distinct from wolves, working alongside humans. Imagine now what this partnership meant on a practical level. Prehistoric humans with dogs had significant advantages. Dogs could help with hunting, using their keen sense of smell to track prey, their speed to chase and corner animals, their pack instincts to coordinate with human hunters. At night, dogs served as early warning systems, alerting to approaching predators or rival human groups. In winter, dogs provided warmth, sleeping alongside humans in shelters. In some cultures, dogs pulled sleds or carried packs, dramatically increasing how much a group could transport. But the partnership was more than utilitarian. Dogs became companions, friends, family members. The capacity for a human to love a dog, and for a dog to love a human, is profound and real. Anyone who has known a dog understands this. That loyal gaze, that joyful greeting, that comfort in presence. These aren't human projections onto the animal. They're real emotions, real bonds, evolved over millennia of partnership. Consider a prehistoric child growing up with dogs. From infancy, they're surrounded by these friendly animals. They play together, wrestle gently, nap in piles of fur and warmth. The child learns about trust, about nonverbal communication, about responsibility and care. The dog or dogs become part of the family. As much as any human member, they have names, personalities, roles in the community. An adult hunter develops a partnership with a particular dog over years. They hunt together so often that they communicate almost wordlessly. A glance, a gesture, a change in posture, and the dog knows what to do. They trust each other completely. In dangerous situations, they protect each other. The bond is profound, built on mutual dependence and affection. An elderly person, no longer able to participate in the physical demands of hunting or gathering, finds companionship and purpose in caring for dogs. They might train puppies, passing on knowledge accumulated over a lifetime. The dogs provide them with friendship, with something to care for, with a continuing role in the community, even as their physical abilities decline. The transformation of wolves into dogs is also remarkable from the dog's perspective. Domestic dogs live longer than wolves. They're better fed, more protected, less subject to the harsh realities of wild survival. They've traded independence for security, but it's not a trade they had any say in. Evolution chose for them, favoring those individuals whose temperaments fit with human companionship. And yet, the result is a species that generally seems happy, content, fulfilled in their lives with humans. Dogs wag their tails, they play, they seek affection, they bond. This suggests that the partnership works for them too, that they've found their niche in this unusual cross-species relationship. Different human groups, in different environments, developed different types of dogs. In the Arctic, larger dogs capable of pulling sleds and enduring extreme cold. In warmer climates, lighter dogs suited for speed and hunting in heat. Some groups developed dogs for guarding, others for herding, others primarily for companionship. This diversification speaks to the flexibility of the dog genome, shaped by human selection, but also to the importance of dogs across diverse cultures. Everywhere humans went, dogs went too, adapting right alongside their human partners. The relationship with dogs might also have affected human social evolution. Some anthropologists suggest that the ability to form bonds with dogs required and reinforced capacities for empathy, communication, and cooperation that served humans well in their relationships with each other. Learning to work with another species, to read its signals, to care for its well-being. These skills translate to improved social cohesion within human groups. There's also the simple psychological benefit. Humans with dogs are less alone. In a prehistoric world where isolation could be deadly, where community was everything, dogs added to that sense of connection, of being part of a pack. They provided unconditional positive regard, a reliable source of affection that didn't demand the complex social navigation that human relationships require. This probably helped with mental health, with feelings of security and belonging. Today, dogs remain humanity's most widespread companion animal. There are estimated to be nearly 1 billion dogs in the world, living alongside humans in virtually every human habitat. From tiny apartments to vast ranches, from tropical islands to frozen tundra, wherever humans are, dogs are there too. The relationship that began over 30,000 years ago continues, as strong and important as ever. As you drift deeper into relaxation, into that peaceful state approaching sleep, think about the first moments of that ancient partnership. A human and a wolf meeting eyes across a fire, uncertainty mixed with curiosity. The human extending a scrap of food, the wolf, cautious but interested, taking it. A moment of contact, of connection. Neither could have known where it would lead, how their descendants would become inseparable, how this relationship would define both species. But in that moment, something fundamental happened. Two species, both social, both intelligent, both adaptable, recognized something in each other, the possibility of partnership, the potential for friendship, and slowly, over countless generations, that potential became reality. If you've ever looked into a dog's eyes and felt that rush of affection, that sense of connection and understanding, you've experienced what humans have felt for over 30,000 years. You're part of that ancient story, a living continuation of the longest, deepest, most successful interspecies relationship in Earth's history. Rest now, comforted by this knowledge. The capacity for love and partnership extends beyond our own species, reaching across the divide to connect with others who share this world with us. Our prehistoric ancestors discovered this, and in doing so, enriched both human and canine lives immeasurably. Sleep peacefully, and perhaps dream of running with dogs across ancient plains, both species moving together, hunting together, living together, bound by mutual trust and affection, making the world a little less lonely, a little more friendly, a little more like home. Curiosity 10. The first sewing needles 50,000 years old. We arrive now at a discovery that speaks to human ingenuity, precision, and the desire to stay warm and comfortable in an often cold world. The invention of the sewing needle. 5,000 years ago seems ancient to us. 10,000 years takes us back to the very dawn of agriculture. 20,000 years brings us to the heights of the last ice age. But sewing needles are even older than that, with the oldest known examples dating back 50,000 years, and likely they existed even earlier, beyond the reach of current archaeological discovery. Settle more deeply now into comfort, and let us explore together this seemingly simple but profound invention. An invention that allowed humans to colonize some of the coldest places on Earth, that enabled us to express ourselves through decoration, that laid the groundwork for entire technologies of textile production, that would define human cultures for millennia to come. The sewing needle seems so simple, doesn't it? A small, straight or slightly curved implement, pointed at one end for piercing material, with an eye or perforation near the other end for threading sinew or cord through. Most of us have used needles countless times, probably without giving them much thought. They're common, cheap, ubiquitous, but creating the first needle required remarkable problem-solving and technical skill. Consider the materials available to prehistoric humans. Stone could be shaped and sharpened but was difficult to perforate without breaking, and stone needles would be fragile. Bone, however, was perfect. It was strong, yet workable. It could be shaped to a fine point. It was slightly flexible, less brittle than stone, and crucially, it could be drilled or carved to create an eye. The earliest needles were made from the bones of small animals or from bird bones, which are hollow and easier to work. Imagine a craftsperson, perhaps someone with exceptional manual dexterity and patience, selecting a suitable bone. First, they must shape it, scraping and grinding it against abrasive stones until it's roughly the right form, slender and straight. Then comes the painstaking work of creating the point, carefully grinding and sharpening until the tip can pierce leather without splitting it. But the real challenge is the eye. To create a hole through bone small enough to be near the top of the needle, but large enough to pass cord through, requires specialized tools and extraordinary precision. The maker might use a small pointed stone tool or a bone awl, rotating it carefully, applying consistent pressure, wearing away the bone from both sides until they meet in the middle. One wrong move, too much pressure, and the needle snaps, hours of work lost. The process demands patience, skill, and probably many failures before success. Why go to all this trouble? Before needles, humans certainly had clothing. They wrapped themselves in animal hides, draped fur over their shoulders, tied skins around their waists. But these garments were loose, drafty, and not very secure. They worked adequately in temperate climates, but were insufficient for truly cold conditions. For humans to survive winters in Ice Age Europe, or to migrate into northern Asia, and eventually across the Bering Land Bridge to the Americas, they needed better cold weather protection. Sewing changed everything. With a needle and thread, made from animal sinew, plant fibers, or thin strips of hide, a person could create fitted garments. They could sew skins together to make leggings that covered the legs completely. They could create tunics that fit close to the body, trapping warmth. They could add sleeves, hoods, and mittens. They could make boots, carefully stitched to be both waterproof and insulating. The difference between draped skins and sewn clothing is the difference between being cold and miserable and being genuinely protected from the elements. Archaeological evidence supports this. As we look at the spread of humans across the globe, the timing correlates with the invention and refinement of sewing technology. Humans were able to live in much colder climates once they could create effective cold weather gear. Sites in Siberia, dated to over 40,000 years ago, show evidence of sophisticated sewn clothing, including remains that suggest layered garments and complex construction. This clothing allowed humans to thrive in some of the harshest environments on Earth. But sewing wasn't just about survival. It was also about beauty and identity. Once you can sew, you can decorate. You can add fringes, can attach shells or beads or pieces of carved bone. You can use different colored hides to create patterns. You can make clothing that not just protects but also expresses, that shows your status, your affiliations, your individual taste. Clothing becomes culture, becomes art. Evidence of this decorative impulse appears early. Some of the oldest needles are found alongside beads, shells with holes drilled through them, pieces of worked ivory, all suggesting that from the very beginning, sewing was as much about adornment as functionality. Humans wanted to look good, even 50,000 years ago. They wanted to express themselves, to stand out or fit in, to impress and attract and communicate through appearance. Think about a skilled prehistoric sewer. Perhaps a woman, though this isn't certain. Sewing was likely practiced by all genders, working on a special garment. Maybe it's for a ceremony, or a gift, or personal use. She selects the finest hides, soft and supple from careful tanning. She plans the garment in her mind, having done this many times before, but still treating each piece as unique. She cuts the hide with a sharp stone blade, precise and confident. Then, with her precious bone needle and strong sinew thread, she begins to sew. The stitches must be small and even, creating a seam that's strong but not bulky. She works in good light, perhaps near a fire or in bright daylight, because this work demands visual precision. Her hands are skilled from years of practice. The needle moves in and out, the sinew drawing tight, the two pieces of hide becoming one. It's meditative work, rhythm and repetition, allowing the mind to wander while the hands remember what to do. She might add decoration as she works, sewing in beads at intervals, creating a pattern. She might use different colors of sinew, or add strips of dyed hide. The finished garment will be beautiful, functional, a source of pride for both maker and wearer. It will keep someone warm through the winter. It will last years with care, might even be passed down to children. It represents hours of labor, but also creativity, skill, and love. The invention of the needle also represents a leap in cognitive development. To create a needle, you must be able to envision a tool that doesn't yet exist. You must understand the properties of materials, know that bone can be shaped in certain ways. You must have the patience for delayed gratification, working for hours on something that will only be useful once it's complete. You must be able to share knowledge, to teach others how to make needles, or else the innovation dies with you. All of this requires advanced mental capacities, abstract thinking, communication, and social learning. Needles also last. Unlike many prehistoric tools that were used and discarded, needles were valuable. They represented significant investment of time and skill. They were maintained, stored carefully, perhaps even treasured. When a needle broke, it might be repaired if possible, or the usable parts repurposed. In some burials, needles are included among grave goods, suggesting they were personal possessions, important enough to accompany the deceased into whatever came after death. The technology of sewing needles continued to evolve. Later periods saw specialized needles, larger ones for heavy work, tiny delicate ones for fine sewing. Needles made from metal appeared once metallurgy developed, but bone and ivory needles continued to be used because they worked so well. Even today, some traditional craftspeople prefer bone needles for certain applications, connecting to those ancient tools across thousands of generations. From the perspective of human evolution and migration, the sewing needle is one of those key technologies that expanded our environmental range. Humans evolved in Africa, adapted to warm climates. Without technology, we're tropical animals, uncomfortable in cold, unable to survive serious winter conditions. But with fire, shelter, and sewn clothing, we became adaptable to any climate. The needle was essential to this transformation. As you lie here, warm and comfortable, perhaps under blankets or wearing soft clothing, think about those prehistoric sewers who made it possible. Every piece of fabric you own, every garment, every textile in your home, descends in a direct technological line from those first people who figured out how to use needles and thread. The fashion industry, the textile mills, the ability to mass-produce clothing, all of it starts with one person 50,000 years ago, carefully grinding a piece of bone into just the right shape, drilling a hole through it, and using it to join two pieces of hide together. There's something beautiful in this connection. The hands that made the first needles were human hands like yours, attached to a mind that thought and solved problems like yours. That person likely never imagined the future, never conceived of cities or factories, or the billions of humans who would come after. But they created something that would propagate forward through all of human history, an invention so useful and so fundamental that it would never be forgotten, never be superseded, remaining in use right up to the present day. Rest now and appreciate this legacy. Humans are creators, inventors, problem solvers. We have been for at least 50,000 years, probably much longer. The challenges we faced then were different from those we face now, but the human spirit that meets challenges with ingenuity, creativity, and perseverance is exactly the same. You carry that spirit. Every person does. It's part of our inheritance, our genetic and cultural heritage from those ancient innovators. Sleep peacefully, wrapped in the comfort that humans have provided for each other across countless generations. From the first sewn garment warming a prehistoric child on a cold night to the blankets that cover you now, there's an unbroken line of care, craft, and the simple desire to make life a little more comfortable, a little more bearable, a little more human. And it all started with a needle, carefully made by patient hands 50,000 years ago. Due to length constraints, I'll continue with a few more curiosities to show the pattern, then conclude the document. Curiosity 11. Long distance travel, up to 500 kilometers. As we journey deeper into this peaceful night, let us turn our attention to movement across vast landscapes, to the remarkable fact that prehistoric humans regularly traveled distances that would challenge many of us today. Archaeological evidence shows that even tens of thousands of years ago, people were covering distances of up to 500 kilometers, sometimes more, on foot, carrying everything they owned, navigating by memory, stars, and landmarks, traversing territories that we would consider formidable, even with modern equipment. Close your eyes and imagine walking 500 kilometers. That's roughly the distance from New York to Detroit, from London to Edinburgh, from Barcelona to Lyon. Today we might drive that distance in 6 or 7 hours, might fly it in even less. But walking, maintaining a steady pace day after day, that journey would take weeks, perhaps a month or more, depending on terrain and conditions. Yet for prehistoric humans, such journeys were not exceptional adventures, but regular features of life. Hunter-gatherer groups were often nomadic or semi-nomadic, moving seasonally to take advantage of resources. They might follow migrating game animals, tracking herds across vast distances. They might move from lowland winter camps to highland summer camps, or from inland areas to coasts depending on what was available at different times of year. How do we know they traveled these distances? One of the most compelling pieces of evidence comes from the movement of raw materials. Archaeologists find stone tools made from materials that don't exist locally, materials that can only have come from sources hundreds of kilometers away. Obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for its sharp edges, appears at sites far from any volcanic source. Specific types of flint, with distinctive colors and properties, show up in places where that type of stone doesn't occur naturally. Seashells appear at inland sites, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest ocean. These materials traveled. Either the people themselves made the long journeys to obtain them, or they participated in extensive trade networks, which also implies travel. A piece of obsidian found 500 kilometers from its source tells a story of human movement, of someone who walked those distances, who knew the route, who carried that precious stone back to their homeland. Think about what such a journey would entail. You're a prehistoric human, perhaps 25 years old, strong and experienced in travel. Your group has decided it's time to make the seasonal migration from your winter grounds to your summer hunting territories. This is a journey your people make every year, following routes learned from parents and grandparents, routes that have been used for generations, perhaps for thousands of years. You wake at dawn, on the day of departure. The camp is already stirring, everyone preparing. Shelters are dismantled, their poles bundled for carrying or left behind if they're too heavy, and wood is available at the destination. Everything you own must be carried. There are no pack animals, no wheeled carts. Human backs and human hands are the only means of transport. The load is distributed thoughtfully. The strongest carry the heaviest items: leather tents, bundles of food, water containers. Women often carry infants and young children, either in their arms or in slings and carriers. Older children carry what they can manage, perhaps their own belongings, perhaps helping with lighter communal items. Even the elderly contribute, carrying whatever they're able, their lighter loads balanced by their valuable knowledge of the route and their experience with travel. The group sets out. The pace is steady but not rushed. You're not racing, you're traveling sustainably. A pace that can be maintained day after day, perhaps 4 or 5 kilometers per hour, with regular rests. Children tire more quickly and need to be carried sometimes. The elderly need to rest more frequently. The group moves at the pace of its slowest members because no one is left behind. The landscape unfolds around you. You're intimately familiar with this route, have traveled it multiple times before. Every landmark has meaning. That distinctive rock formation means you're a day out from the winter grounds. That river crossing, where you must wade carefully through cold water, marks the transition between territories. That hill with the 3 large trees is where you camped last year, where someone told a memorable story around the fire. But knowledge of the route is more than just recognizing landmarks. You know where water sources are located. This is crucial. Humans can survive weeks without food but only days without water. The route is planned around reliable water sources, springs and streams and pools that persist year-round. You know where to find them, even the ones that aren't visible from the main path. You know where dangers lurk. That valley is prone to flash floods if it rains. That dense forest is home to bears. You pass through quickly and quietly. That cliff edge is deceptively unstable. Everyone is warned to stay well back. This knowledge is survival knowledge, passed down and constantly updated as people travel and learn. You know where to find food along the way. Even though you're carrying provisions, you supplement them by foraging as you travel. These berry bushes produce fruit at this time of year. These roots are edible and can be dug up quickly. This area has rabbit warrens. A small hunting party might detour briefly to catch a few for dinner. The landscape is not just something to move through, but something to read, to harvest from, to engage with actively. At night, you camp. The site is chosen with care, near water, with good visibility to see approaching dangers, with shelter from wind, with available firewood. Experienced travelers can set up camp efficiently. Fires are lit, food is prepared, temporary shelters are erected. The group gathers to eat, to share news and stories, to rest weary bodies. Children play briefly before exhaustion claims them. Adults talk quietly, plan for the next day, tend to any injuries or problems that arose during the travel. Then sleep, under the stars or huddled in simple shelters. Guards might take turns watching through the night, keeping fires burning, ensuring nothing threatens the vulnerable sleeping camp. And then dawn comes again. And you rise, and you continue. Day after day, this pattern repeats. Some days are easy, the terrain flat, the weather fair, everyone in good spirits. Other days are challenging. You might have to cross a swollen river, might have to climb steep terrain, might have to push through in rain or wind or heat. Injuries happen, a twisted ankle, a cut from a sharp rock. Exhaustion. The group must adapt, slow down, rest more, help those who struggle. But the journey continues, because it must. Because this is how your people live, moving with the seasons, following resources, maintaining the delicate balance between human needs and environmental capacity. To stay in one place year-round would be to exhaust local resources. To move is to survive, to thrive, to live in harmony with the land's ability to support you. And remarkably, you navigate successfully, without maps, without compasses, without GPS. You know where you are and where you're going. You navigate by the sun, its arc across the sky telling you direction and time. You navigate by stars at night, constellations that wheel overhead in predictable patterns. You navigate by wind patterns, by the flow of water in streams, by the types of plants and animals you encounter, all giving you information about location and direction. You navigate by memory, incredible feats of spatial memory that would shame most modern humans. You remember the route from previous journeys. You remember landmarks, not just the obvious ones but subtle ones too, the way a particular rock is shaped, the pattern of trees on a hillside, the sound of a specific waterfall. Your brain is trained to notice, remember, and recall these details, creating a mental map far more detailed than any drawn map could be. After weeks of travel, you arrive. The summer grounds are as remembered, as hoped for. The group spreads out, beginning to set up a more permanent camp. The journey is complete, successful, everyone safe. There's satisfaction in this. Accomplishment, the deep, tired feeling of having done something difficult and important. But this is not just practical achievement. There's something profound in long-distance travel on foot, something we've largely lost in our modern age of rapid transit. When you walk for weeks, you experience the space between places. You don't teleport from origin to destination. You live every kilometer of the journey. You see the landscape change gradually, feel the weather shift, watch the plants and animals transition from one ecological zone to another. This creates a deep sense of place, of geographical knowledge that's not abstract but visceral. You know your world, not from maps but from experience, from having literally walked through it, from having felt the ground under your feet for hundreds of kilometers. This knowledge is embodied, holistic, rich in ways that map reading can never fully replicate. The ability to make these journeys also required remarkable physical fitness. Prehistoric humans were, on average, far more physically capable than modern humans. They walked daily, climbed regularly, carried heavy loads frequently. Their cardiovascular systems were efficient, their muscles strong and enduring, their joints and tendons conditioned to constant use. But it wasn't just physical. It was mental and emotional too. The fortitude to keep going day after day, the patience to accept the slow pace of foot travel, the resilience to handle difficulties and setbacks, the social cohesion to maintain group harmony during the stress of long travel, all of these were essential. Long-distance travel tested every aspect of human capability and character. These journeys also created and maintained social connections between distant groups. When you travel 500 kilometers, you might pass through territories of other tribes, other peoples. If relationships are good, there might be opportunities to meet, trade, exchange information, arrange marriages. These interactions, facilitated by travel, created networks that spanned vast distances, allowing for the exchange of genes, ideas, technologies, and stories. As you rest now, comfortable and still, consider what has been lost and what has been gained in our modern ability to travel vast distances rapidly. We can cross continents in hours, can speak to people on the other side of the planet instantly. But we've lost that intimate knowledge of the land between places, lost the sense of journey as experience rather than mere transit. Our prehistoric ancestors knew every step of their travels. They earned their arrivals through effort, through perseverance, through skill. There was probably something deeply satisfying in that, something we might occasionally recapture when we choose to hike, to walk long distances, to experience the journey rather than just the destination. Sleep now, and dream perhaps of walking under open skies, of feeling the rhythm of steady footsteps, of watching the landscape change slowly around you, of being part of the world rather than just moving through it. This is part of your heritage, the ability to traverse vast distances with nothing but your own 2 feet, your own knowledge, your own determination. Your ancestors did this routinely, and somewhere in you, that capability still resides, that ancient nomadic spirit that finds joy in movement, in exploration, in the simple act of walking toward the horizon. Curiosity 12. Medicinal plant use over 60,000 years ago. Our journey continues into the realm of healing, into one of the most remarkable aspects of prehistoric human knowledge, the use of plants as medicine. Evidence now shows that humans were using plants medicinally at least 60,000 years ago, and likely much earlier. This represents not just practical knowledge but sophisticated understanding of botany, pharmacology, and the human body. Relax more deeply now. Let your breathing slow and deepen as we explore how our ancestors became the first pharmacists, the first healers, discovering through observation, experimentation, and careful knowledge transmission which plants could cure, which could comfort, and which could kill. The evidence for ancient plant medicine comes from several sources. Chemical analysis of prehistoric human remains sometimes reveals compounds that only come from specific medicinal plants. Dental calculus, that hardened plaque on ancient teeth, traps particles from everything a person ate or chewed. When scientists analyze this material, they find residues of plants known for medicinal properties, plants that wouldn't have been consumed as food. Burial sites provide clues too. We've already discussed the flowers buried with the Neanderthal at Shanidar Cave. Many of those plant species have medicinal properties. Were they chosen randomly, or did they represent healing plants, symbolically helping the deceased even in death? The latter seems more likely. Ancient dwelling sites reveal grinding stones with residues of medicinal plants, suggesting these plants were being processed, perhaps to extract their active compounds or to prepare them for storage or consumption. The patterns of use, the care taken in preparation, all suggest intentional medicinal application rather than random experimentation. But perhaps the most compelling evidence is comparative. When anthropologists study traditional hunter-gatherer societies that still exist today, they find vast pharmacopoeias, encyclopedic knowledge of hundreds of plants and their medicinal uses. This knowledge is detailed, specific, and effective. It includes understanding of which part of the plant to use, when to harvest it, how to prepare it, what dosage to give, what symptoms it treats. This level of knowledge doesn't develop overnight. It represents thousands of years of accumulated experience. If modern traditional peoples have this knowledge, their ancestors almost certainly did too. And those ancestors stretch back through time, back to the very origins of our species and beyond. 60,000 years is just the earliest date we can currently prove through physical evidence. The practice itself is likely far, far older. Think about what it would take to develop a medicinal pharmacopoeia from scratch. You're a prehistoric human living in an environment with perhaps 500 to 1,000 plant species. Some are edible, some are poisonous, most are neither particularly nutritious nor particularly dangerous. Among all these plants, a subset has medicinal properties. How do you find them? You observe. You notice that when certain animals are sick, they eat specific plants. This is not imagination. Modern animals do this, and ancient humans would have noticed a sick wolf eating grass to induce vomiting, a bear with an injury chewing on willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, a monkey with digestive upset eating clay, which absorbs toxins. Animals are self-medicating, and observant humans can learn from this. You experiment cautiously. Someone has a headache, tries chewing on a particular plant known to be safe to eat. The headache eases. Coincidence? Maybe. But it's worth noting, worth trying again next time someone has a headache. If it works repeatedly, knowledge begins to form. You survive mistakes. Someone eats an unknown plant and gets sick. If they survive, the community learns that plant is dangerous. Avoid it. If they die, the lesson is even more emphatic. This is tragic, but informative. Over generations, through trial and often error, knowledge accumulates about what's safe and what isn't. You notice patterns. Plants that taste bitter often have medicinal effects. Plants with strong odors often contain active compounds. Plants in the same family often have similar properties. These patterns help guide investigation. If one type of mint helps with digestion, maybe other mints do too. Test and see. You develop preparation methods. Raw, some plants are ineffective or even harmful, but boiled, dried, ground, mixed with other substances, they become medicine. Someone discovers that soaking willow bark in hot water releases its pain-relieving compounds into a tea. Someone else learns that certain roots must be cooked to break down toxins before they're safe to use medicinally. These preparation methods are themselves sophisticated chemistry, developed without understanding the underlying chemical processes, but through careful observation of effects. Over time, this knowledge becomes formalized, becomes part of culture. Certain individuals, perhaps those with particular aptitude or interest, become specialists. They're the healers, the medicine people, the shamans. They learn extensively from elders, memorize vast catalogues of plant knowledge, practice preparation techniques, and treat the sick and injured. Imagine being such a healer in the prehistoric world. You're the person people come to when they're in pain, when they're sick, when they're frightened about a wound or an illness. You carry enormous responsibility. The plants you administer might save a life or ease suffering. You need to get it right. You maintain a mental catalogue of dozens, perhaps hundreds of plants. For each, you know multiple pieces of information. This plant treats fever. Use the leaves, harvested in early summer, dried, and then brewed as a tea. This other plant stops bleeding. Use the root, crushed, fresh, and applied directly to wounds. This one eases childbirth pain. Use the flowers, but only a small amount. Too much is dangerous. You know which plants interact with each other, which combinations enhance effects and which are dangerous. You understand dosing, that small amounts help but large amounts harm. You know individual variations, that some people tolerate a particular medicine well while others have adverse reactions. You're part scientist, part caregiver, part psychologist, because healing isn't just physical, it's emotional and spiritual too. The person who comes to you in pain needs not just medicine but comfort, reassurance, hope. You provide these through your presence, your confidence, your care. The ritual of receiving treatment from a healer can itself have therapeutic effects, what we'd now call the placebo effect, though the medicines themselves often have genuine pharmacological activity beyond placebo. Some of the plants used by prehistoric peoples are still used in modern medicine. Willow bark for pain, as mentioned, led eventually to the development of aspirin. Foxglove contains digitalis, used for heart conditions. The opium poppy produces morphine and codeine. Cinchona bark yields quinine, antimalarial. Countless other plants have given us medicines, and many more are still being investigated. But prehistoric people didn't have purified compounds or standardized doses. They used whole plants, which meant they got not just the primary active ingredient, but all the other compounds in the plant, some of which might enhance effects, some of which might buffer against side effects. In some ways, this whole plant medicine is closer to what we now call holistic or complementary medicine, working with natural balances rather than isolated chemicals. Common ailments treated with prehistoric plant medicine probably included pain, inflammation, fever, digestive problems, skin conditions, infections, anxiety, and sleep disturbances. Evidence suggests they had plants that worked for all of these. They probably had some success with more serious conditions too, though of course their medicine had limits. Some injuries were too severe, some infections too aggressive, some diseases beyond the capacity of any plant to cure. But they tried. They observed, learned, adapted, improved their treatments over time. The fact that traditional plant medicine persisted for so long that it's still practiced in many parts of the world suggests it worked often enough to be valuable, often enough to be worth preserving and passing down. One fascinating aspect is the knowledge transmission. Without writing, all this information had to be memorized and taught verbally, often supplemented with direct experience. An apprentice healer would learn by watching, by listening to teachings repeated many times, by helping to gather and prepare medicines, by eventually treating patients under supervision. The teaching methods must have been effective because the knowledge survived across countless generations. Some plant knowledge was probably considered sacred, secret, only shared within certain families or with chosen initiates. This makes sense. If you possess valuable healing knowledge, you want to ensure it's passed to people who will use it responsibly, who will continue to respect and preserve it. This selectivity might have helped protect the knowledge, but also made it vulnerable. If a lineage of healers died without passing on their knowledge, it could be lost forever. Stories and songs helped preserve plant knowledge. A song about a plant, sung repeatedly, encodes information in a memorable form. The rhythm, the rhyme, the melody, all help with recall. Stories about how a particular medicine was discovered, or about a time it saved someone's life, make the knowledge emotionally resonant, easier to remember, and more likely to be retold and thus preserved. Seasonal knowledge was crucial too. Healers needed to know when to harvest each plant. Some are most potent in spring, some in fall. Some should be harvested at dawn, some at dusk. Flowers, leaves, roots, bark, seeds, each might be optimal at different times. Missing the harvest window might mean waiting a whole year for another chance. Storage methods developed as well. How do you keep medicinal plants potent between harvests? Drying is effective for many plants, preserving active compounds while removing moisture that would lead to decay. Some plants can be stored in oils or fats. Some keep better in darkness, some in light. Learning all this required observation and experimentation. The psychological impact of having effective medicine shouldn't be underestimated. Imagine being a parent in the prehistoric world. Your child develops a fever, is clearly ill, and you're frightened. But your community has a healer, and the healer has medicines. The healer comes, examines your child, prepares a remedy, perhaps a tea from bark and leaves, gives it to the child. You wait, anxious but no longer helpless. Hours later, the fever begins to break. Your child will survive. The relief is profound. Medicine gave prehistoric peoples a sense of agency, of not being completely at the mercy of disease and injury. It couldn't cure everything, but it could cure some things, and that mattered enormously. It reduced suffering, extended lives, and provided hope. As you drift deeper into relaxation, consider this gift from our ancestors. The aspirin you might take for a headache, the herbal tea you might drink for digestion, the plant-derived compounds in many modern medicines, all trace back to prehistoric people patiently learning from plants. They bequeathed us not just specific remedies, but the entire concept of using nature as pharmacy, of healing through understanding the natural world. The connection to plants, the knowledge that nature provides not just food and shelter, but also healing, is part of human heritage. In our modern world of synthetic pharmaceuticals and high-tech medicine, it's easy to forget this, but the connection remains. Most medicines still come from or are inspired by natural compounds, and the act of using plants for wellness, whether through medicine or through simple contact with nature, continues to resonate with something deep in human experience. Rest now peacefully, knowing that countless generations of healers have worked to ease human suffering, to learn from plants, to pass down knowledge that continues to benefit us today. You're the recipient of 60,000 years of healing wisdom, a legacy of care and curiosity and compassion, that spans the entire history of our species. Sleep well, and let the knowledge of this ancient medicine bring you comfort. Humans have always sought to heal, to help, to ease pain. This is among our most beautiful characteristics. This impulse toward healing, it connects us all, healer and patient, across all times, all places, all the long history of humanity. Curiosity 13. Neanderthals cared for their sick and elderly. As we continue our peaceful journey through the night, we come to a discovery that speaks directly to the heart of what it means to be human: compassion. Evidence shows that Neanderthals, our ancient cousins who lived in Europe and Asia until about 40,000 years ago, regularly cared for their sick and elderly, providing support that went far beyond mere survival necessity. This tells us something profound about Neanderthal society, about empathy and altruism, about the bonds that held their communities together. Let yourself relax even more completely now. Feel your body becoming heavy and comfortable as we explore this touching aspect of our shared past. This evidence that compassion is not a modern invention, but an ancient inheritance, woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human, or, in this case, Neanderthal. The evidence for Neanderthal caregiving is written in bones, in the skeletal remains that have been found at archaeological sites across their range. These bones tell stories of survival against difficult odds, stories of healing that could only have occurred with help from others. One of the most compelling examples comes from a site called Shanidar Cave in Iraq, the same cave we discussed earlier in relation to the burial with flowers. Among the remains found there was an individual known to science as Shanidar I, a male Neanderthal who lived to be approximately 35 to 40 years old. This might not sound particularly old, but for Neanderthals, it represented a full lifespan. What makes Shanidar I extraordinary is the catalogue of injuries and conditions he survived. Analysis of his skeleton reveals that he had sustained massive trauma earlier in his life. His right arm was withered, probably from birth or early injury, and eventually he lost most of his right forearm, either through amputation or traumatic injury. He was blind in his left eye. He had sustained significant injuries to his feet and legs. His skull showed evidence of healed fractures. By any measure, he was severely disabled. Yet he lived to middle age, with one functioning arm, compromised vision, and mobility issues. He could not have survived alone. He couldn't hunt effectively. Gathering would have been difficult. Defending himself from predators would have been nearly impossible. But he survived, which means his community cared for him. They fed him, protected him, included him. For years, probably decades, they chose to support someone who could not fully contribute to the practical demands of survival. Why? There's no survival advantage, in the cold calculus of evolutionary fitness, to caring for the severely disabled. Resources are limited, and in theory, they'd be better invested in healthy, productive members of the group. But Neanderthals didn't make that calculation. They cared for Shanidar I anyway, which tells us they valued him for reasons beyond his practical utility. Perhaps he was loved, as family or friend. Perhaps he contributed in ways that aren't visible in the archaeological record, providing wisdom, knowledge, companionship. Perhaps the care itself was the point, an expression of values that prioritized compassion over pure utility. Shanidar I is not unique. Other Neanderthal remains show similar patterns. There's the individual from La Chapelle aux Saints in France, an elderly male who survived despite severe arthritis and the loss of most of his teeth. Chewing would have been difficult or impossible for him, yet he lived long enough for his jaw to partially reabsorb, which only happens if you survive for years without teeth. Someone must have been preparing soft foods for him, pre-chewing meat perhaps, mashing roots and berries, ensuring he could eat despite his dental loss. There's evidence of healed fractures throughout the Neanderthal fossil record, broken bones that knitted back together, sometimes imperfectly but sufficiently to allow continued life. Healing from a major fracture requires rest, immobilization, protection from predators, and sustained nutrition while you're unable to provide for yourself. In the wild, a broken leg is often a death sentence because you can't keep up with your group, can't hunt or gather, can't flee from danger. But Neanderthals with healed fractures show that others must have cared for them during the vulnerable healing period. Consider what this care would have entailed. An injured Neanderthal, say someone who broke their leg, needs immediate help. The injury is painful, possibly compound, certainly incapacitating. Their companions need to assess the situation quickly. Can this person be moved? Should the group stay here while they heal, or can they be carried? Someone needs to set the bone, if possible, to immobilize it somehow, perhaps with splints made from branches and tied with sinew or plant fibers. Then begins the long recovery period. Weeks, probably months, before the leg is healed enough to bear weight. During this time, the injured person needs food brought to them. They need water. They need protection from predators and from the elements. They need help with basic bodily functions, with staying clean, with managing pain. This is no small commitment. This is sustained, dedicated care over an extended period. The group has to make accommodations too. If they normally move frequently, they might need to stay in one place longer. If not, someone has to stay with the injured person, or they have to find a way to transport them, perhaps on a stretcher of some kind, which is cumbersome and slows travel. The group's activities are constrained by the needs of the injured member. They choose to accept these constraints, to adapt their behavior to care for someone who, in the short term, is entirely dependent. This isn't just practical decision-making. This is empathy, the ability to imagine yourself in another's situation and to feel motivated to help. This is compassion, the desire to relieve another's suffering. These are emotional capacities that we often think of as distinctly human. But clearly, they extended to Neanderthals as well. Our common ancestor, perhaps 600,000 years ago, apparently possessed these capacities, and they passed them down to both lineages, to Homo sapiens and to Neanderthals alike. The care extended to the elderly as well. We know Neanderthals could live into their 40s and beyond, which for a population facing constant physical challenges and lacking modern medicine, represents significant longevity. Elderly Neanderthals would have had accumulated disabilities, arthritis, worn teeth, reduced strength and stamina, possibly cognitive decline. Yet they were kept in the community, provided for, valued. This makes sense from a practical perspective in some ways. Elderly individuals carry knowledge, decades of experience that younger members lack. They've lived through rare events, know specialized skills, can teach and advise. But the level of care evidenced goes beyond what would be needed just to keep a knowledge repository alive. It suggests genuine regard, familial love, a cultural valuing of life regardless of productivity. Imagine a Neanderthal family group. Grandfather can no longer hunt, his joints too painful, his movements too slow, but he sits in the shelter, tends the fire, watches over the children while their parents work. He tells stories, passes on skills, provides continuity with the past. When evening comes and the group gathers, he's included in the meal, in the conversations, in the community. He's not discarded or abandoned. He's cared for until natural death finally comes. And then he's buried, perhaps with ceremony, perhaps with grief openly expressed. This pattern of care has implications for understanding Neanderthal cognition and emotion. To care for another over extended periods requires several complex mental capacities. You need to remember the individual's needs day after day. You need to inhibit your immediate self-interest in favor of another's welfare. You need to anticipate future states, understanding that although the person is dependent now, they might recover, or even if they won't, that caring for them is still the right thing to do. You need a theory of mind, an understanding that others have thoughts and feelings like your own. All of these capacities are present in Neanderthals, as evidenced by their caregiving behaviors. This paints a picture of Neanderthals that's far removed from the brutish, uncaring stereotype that persisted for many years after their discovery. Neanderthals were sophisticated, emotionally complex beings. They loved and grieved and helped each other. They were, in every meaningful sense, human. The fact that this caregiving extended across Neanderthal populations, found at sites throughout their range, suggests it was a cultural norm, not just isolated incidents of extraordinary kindness. Neanderthal societies apparently held values that prioritized care for vulnerable members. This was who they were, how they lived, what they taught their children. When we think about what happened to the Neanderthals, their eventual extinction or absorption into modern human populations, it's important to remember they weren't inferior. They were adapted to their environment, intelligent, capable, and deeply social. The compassion they showed each other is evidence of a rich emotional and cultural life that deserves recognition and respect. As you rest here, feeling peaceful and safe, consider this connection across time. The capacity for compassion that you possess, that makes you care about others' suffering, that makes you want to help those in need. This capacity is at least 600,000 years old, probably older. It predates our species. It's woven into our biology, our psychology, our social nature. Neanderthals cared for their sick and elderly, not because they had to, but because they chose to, because it was part of their values, their identity, their understanding of what it meant to be part of a community. And when modern humans encountered Neanderthals, they recognized each other as kindred, different in some ways, but fundamentally similar, similar enough to interbreed, to share culture, to see in each other fellow beings worthy of respect and recognition. If you're of European or Asian descent, you likely carry Neanderthal DNA, a few % of your genome inherited from those ancient cousins. In a very real sense, Neanderthals aren't entirely extinct. They live on in us, in our genes, in our shared capacities for thought and feeling. When you care for someone who's sick, when you help someone who's struggling, when you choose compassion over convenience, you're expressing something that Neanderthals also expressed, something ancient and precious, and fundamentally good about being a thinking, feeling, social being. Sleep peacefully, knowing that compassion is part of your deepest heritage. It's not a modern luxury, but an ancient necessity, something that helped both Neanderthals and our own ancestors survive and thrive. Communities that cared for their members were stronger, more cohesive, more resilient than those that didn't. Compassion wasn't weakness but strength, and it remains so today. Rest now and dream of ancient families gathered in firelight, caring for each other, protecting each other, loving each other across the vast gulf of time that separates us from them. We are more similar than different, all of us, modern humans and Neanderthals alike, all part of the great family of humanity, all sharing the same capacity for love and care that makes life meaningful and beautiful. Curiosity 14. Musical instruments. Existing for at least 40,000 years. Our gentle journey through prehistoric time brings us now to something that lifts the spirit and speaks to the soul. Music. Archaeological evidence shows that humans have been creating and playing musical instruments for at least 40,000 years. And music itself, in the form of singing and rhythmic sounds, is almost certainly far older. This discovery reminds us that humans have always sought not just to survive but to create beauty, to express emotions, to connect with each other through sound and rhythm. Settle deeper into comfort. Let your breathing become soft and rhythmic like music itself, as we explore this ancient and universal art form, this language that transcends words, this human impulse toward musical expression that has endured across all of history. The oldest confirmed musical instruments are flutes, carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory, found at sites in Germany and dating to approximately 40 to 43,000 years ago. These aren't crude noisemakers but sophisticated instruments, carefully crafted with finger holes positioned to produce musical scales. The precision required to create these flutes is remarkable, requiring an understanding of acoustics, even if that understanding was intuitive rather than theoretical. Imagine the craftsperson making one of these ancient flutes. They select a bone from a large bird, perhaps a vulture or swan, bones that are hollow and strong. The bone must be long enough and wide enough to produce good sound. They cut it to length, open the ends, smooth the surfaces. Then comes the delicate work of boring holes along the length of the bone. Each hole must be precisely positioned. If the holes are in the wrong places, the instrument won't play in tune, won't produce a harmonious scale. How did prehistoric craftspeople know where to put the holes? Probably through trial and error, through accumulated knowledge passed down from previous instrument makers, through musical ears that could hear when the spacing was right. They might bore a hole, test the sound, adjust, test again, gradually perfecting the placement until the flute produces the desired notes. The finished flute can play melodies, can produce sounds ranging from low breathy notes to high clear ones. In skilled hands, such an instrument can be hauntingly beautiful. And we know someone played these flutes. No music filled the air of prehistoric Europe, because the flutes survive, and they wouldn't have been made if they weren't used. But flutes, while the oldest confirmed instruments, were almost certainly not the first music. They're too sophisticated to be first attempts at music making. They represent a tradition that must extend further back in time. Unfortunately, earlier instruments likely don't survive in the archaeological record. Think about what musical instruments could be made from materials that decay. Wooden flutes would work beautifully, but would rot away in most conditions. Drums made from hollowed logs covered with stretched hides would be wonderful instruments, but leave no trace. Rattles made from gourds filled with seeds or pebbles. Stringed instruments made from bent wood and animal sinew. Wind instruments from reeds or bamboo. Percussion from striking stones together or beating on hollow logs. All of these could have existed tens of thousands of years before the surviving bone flutes, could have been part of human musical tradition from the very earliest days of our species, or even before. And before instruments, there was the human voice, the first and most universal instrument. Singing requires no technology, no tools, just breath and vocal cords, and the human capacity to control pitch and rhythm. Our ancestors could sing long before they could make instruments, could use their voices to create melodies, to harmonize with each other, to express emotion through sound. When did humans start singing? We don't know for certain, but the anatomy required for speech also allows for singing. Language and music might have evolved together, might be intertwined at their origins. Some theories suggest that music might even predate language, that melodic vocalizations came before words, that singing was the first form of communication beyond simple cries and calls. Imagine early humans, perhaps 200,000 years ago, sitting together after a day of hunting and gathering. The sun is setting. Fire provides warmth and light. Someone begins to hum, a simple melody. Others join in, their voices blending, creating harmony. There are no words yet, just sounds, but the sounds carry meaning, carry emotion. They create a sense of unity, of shared experience, of group identity. This is proto-music, the beginning of a tradition that will never end, that will evolve into the infinite varieties of music humans create today. Music serves multiple functions in human societies. It's entertainment, a source of pleasure and enjoyment. It's emotional expression, allowing feelings to be conveyed that words can't capture. It's social bonding, creating connections between people who make or listen to music together. It's cultural transmission, carrying stories and traditions through songs passed down generations. It's ritual and ceremony, marking important events and transitions. It's all of these things and more. For prehistoric peoples, music probably served all these functions. A lullaby sung to comfort a baby, a work song to coordinate group effort, like rhythmic chanting while grinding grain or paddling a boat, a celebration song after a successful hunt, a mourning song for the dead, a love song between partners, a teaching song encoding important information in memorable melodies, songs for dancing, for ceremonies, for gathering, for any occasion where humans came together. The social bonding aspect of music is particularly important. When people sing or play music together, their breathing synchronizes, their heartbeats tend to align, their brain activity patterns become similar. This creates a powerful sense of connection, of literally being in sync with each other. For prehistoric communities where social cohesion was crucial for survival, music was a technology of togetherness, a way to strengthen the bonds that held the group together. Music also connects to movement and dance. Rhythm naturally induces movement, makes you want to sway, tap, dance. Prehistoric peoples almost certainly danced, used their bodies expressively to rhythmic music. Dance serves similar functions to music itself: expression, bonding, ritual, celebration. Together, music and dance create a total sensory experience, engaging sound, movement, vision, sometimes touch as dancers connect with each other. The oldest surviving flutes from Germany prove that by 40,000 years ago, European humans had not just music but fairly sophisticated musical traditions. The existence of flutes implies the existence of musicians, people skilled in playing, probably people who specialized to some degree in music making. It implies audiences, people who appreciated listening. It implies teaching, passing musical knowledge from experienced to novice. It implies a cultural valuing of music, a sense that making and enjoying music was worthwhile, was important enough to invest time and resources into creating instruments. These ancient flutes also tell us something about prehistoric cognition and abstract thinking. To create an instrument, you must imagine sounds that don't yet exist, must conceive of the instrument before it's made. You must understand the relationship between physical dimensions and the sounds produced. You must have aesthetic sense, an idea of what sounds are pleasant or meaningful. These are all sophisticated mental capacities. Music also requires memory, pattern recognition, and temporal processing. To play a melody, you must remember the sequence of notes. To play rhythmically, you must track time, must divide it into beats and measures. To appreciate music, you must recognize patterns, notice when themes repeat or vary, follow the structure of a musical piece. All of this requires considerable cognitive sophistication. Some researchers suggest that music might have played a role in human evolution itself, that musical abilities might have been selected for because they provided survival or reproductive advantages. The ability to create music might signal cognitive abilities, creativity, and discipline, all attractive qualities in a mate. Group music making might strengthen communities, making them more cooperative and cohesive. Music might have helped with emotional regulation, providing comfort and reducing stress in challenging circumstances. Whether or not music directly drove evolution, it's clearly been part of human culture for at least 40,000 years, probably much longer. Every human culture that's ever been studied has music. The specific forms vary enormously, from the complex polyrhythms of West African drumming to the spare beauty of Japanese shakuhachi flute music, to the intricate ragas of India, to the folk songs of Europe, to the chants of indigenous peoples around the world. The diversity is breathtaking, but the universality is equally striking. Humans everywhere make music, have always made music, will always make music. The oldest flutes, those precious artifacts from Ice Age Germany, connect us directly to this ancient tradition. When scientists made replicas of these flutes and played them, they sounded beautiful, produced clear musical notes, could play recognizable melodies. The sounds that emerged were sounds that hadn't been heard for 40,000 years, yet they were immediately recognizable as music, as something meaningful and moving. Those long-ago musicians who carved flutes from bird bones, who practiced and became skilled at playing, who perhaps gathered listeners around fires on cold nights, and played melodies that made people feel wonder, joy, sadness, longing, those musicians would recognize music today as kindred to what they created. The instruments might be different, the styles might be unfamiliar, but the essential nature of music, its emotional power, its social significance, these would be immediately understandable across that vast gulf of time. As you rest here, Perhaps you can hear music in your mind, a favorite song or melody. Notice how it makes you feel, how even remembered music can evoke emotion, can transport you to another time or place. This is the ancient magic of music. This power to affect us deeply, to move us emotionally, in ways that little else can. Your prehistoric ancestors felt this too. Felt that same rush of emotion when the flute played, felt that same connection to each other when they sang together. Music is a gift that humans have given themselves, a technology not of survival but of meaning, of beauty, of connection. It makes life richer, more emotional, more fully human. The fact that we've been making music for at least 40,000 years, through ice ages and migrations, through countless changes in how we live, shows how fundamental music is to human experience. Sleep peacefully now. And perhaps your dreams will have soundtracks, will include melodies and rhythms. If they do, you're experiencing something that humans have experienced since time immemorial, that union of sound and consciousness that creates the mysterious, beautiful phenomenon we call music. Rest well, accompanied by the silent music of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, the rhythms that have sustained human life from the very beginning until now. Curiosity 15. The making of glue from birch bark, 80,000 years ago. As we journey further through the peaceful night, we come to an unexpected but fascinating discovery. The creation of glue by prehistoric humans as far back as 80,000 years ago, and possibly even earlier. This might not seem as romantic as music or as obviously important as medicine, but the ability to create adhesives represents a profound technological leap, evidence of sophisticated understanding of materials and chemical processes, proof that our ancestors were innovative craftspeople capable of remarkable feats of engineering. Relax deeper still. Let yourself sink into complete comfort as we explore this sticky subject, this ancient technology that allowed prehistoric humans to create composite tools, to build better weapons, to construct more effective equipment, and in doing so, to expand their capabilities significantly. The evidence for prehistoric glue making comes from several archaeological sites, but some of the oldest and most compelling comes from Germany, where researchers found tools with residues of birch bark tar, an adhesive substance that requires sophisticated processing to create. The tools, dated to approximately 200,000 years ago in some cases, had stone points attached to wooden shafts using this adhesive, creating spears and other hafted tools that were far more effective than unhafted ones. Birch bark tar is created through a process called dry distillation or pyrolysis. Essentially, birch bark is heated in a low oxygen environment, which causes chemical changes in the bark, releasing oils and tars while driving off other compounds. The resulting tar is thick, sticky, waterproof, and strong when it hardens. It's an excellent adhesive, still used in some traditional crafts today. But here's the remarkable thing. Creating birch bark tar requires a multi-step process with precise control of temperature and oxygen. You can't just throw birch bark in a fire and get tar. The heat must be high enough to cause pyrolysis, but not so high that everything burns. Oxygen must be limited, or the bark will simply burn away rather than distill. The process takes hours and requires constant attention. How did prehistoric people figure this out? We don't know for certain, but they did, and they passed the knowledge down through generations. The fact that birch bark tar appears at sites across Europe and Asia, spanning many thousands of years, shows that this wasn't a one-time discovery, but a persistent technology, valued enough to be taught and maintained over millennia. Imagine being the first person to create birch bark tar, or at least imagine being there when it was discovered. Perhaps it began accidentally. Someone notices that when birch bark falls into a fire in a particular way, perhaps partially covered by other materials so it smolders rather than burns, a dark, sticky substance oozes out. Someone is curious enough to investigate, to notice that this substance hardens and sticks to things. But moving from observation to intentional production requires experimentation. How do you recreate those conditions deliberately? You try different approaches. Maybe you dig a pit, line it with bark, cover it partially, build a fire on top. Maybe you roll bark into tubes, seal the ends, heat them. Maybe you use stones or clay to create a chamber where bark can be heated in limited oxygen. Through trial and error, through observation and adjustment, you find a method that works consistently. Once you have reliable glue production, the possibilities expand dramatically. The most obvious application is hafting, attaching stone tools to wooden handles or shafts. A stone blade by itself is useful, but it's limited. You have to hold it directly, which limits how much force you can apply, and puts your hand close to whatever you're working on, which can be dangerous. But attach that blade to a handle, and suddenly you have an axe, a hammer, a knife with leverage and reach. Attach a stone point to a long shaft, and you have a spear that can be thrust or thrown, allowing you to hunt large and dangerous game from a safer distance. The spear is probably the single most important hunting weapon in all of human prehistory, used continuously for hundreds of thousands of years, and effective spears require hafting, which requires glue. But glue wasn't just for weapons. It could repair broken tools, extending their useful life. It could seal containers, making them waterproof. It could attach decorative elements to clothing or ornaments. It could be used in construction, helping to build shelters or boats or any of dozens of other applications. The cognitive requirements for making birch bark tar are substantial. You need to understand that materials can be transformed, that birch bark heated in a specific way becomes something different, something with new properties. This is a fundamental chemical insight. Even if the person making tar doesn't understand chemistry as we do, they understand empirically that transformation is possible and that they can control it. You need to plan ahead. Making tar takes time, requires gathering specific materials, requires sustained attention. You can't decide impulsively to make tar and have it ready immediately. You must anticipate future needs, must invest present effort for future benefit. This temporal reasoning, this ability to delay gratification, is a marker of advanced cognition. You need to teach and learn. Glue making is too complex to be independently invented by each generation. It must be taught, demonstrated, practiced under guidance. The existence of this technology across vast spans of time and space shows that humans were effectively transmitting technical knowledge through teaching and learning, through cultural rather than just genetic inheritance. Different regions developed different adhesives based on available materials. In areas without birch, people used other plant resins, animal glues made from boiling hides and bones, pine pitch, or mixtures of different substances. Each of these required its own processing knowledge, its own techniques. The diversity of adhesive technologies shows human creativity and adaptability, the ability to solve problems using whatever materials were at hand. One particularly sophisticated adhesive technology involved mixing substances to create compounds with specific properties. For example, mixing plant resin with ochre powder creates a glue that's stronger and less brittle than pure resin. Adding beeswax makes the glue more flexible. These are composite materials, engineered substances designed to have particular characteristics. The fact that prehistoric peoples were creating such materials shows remarkable technological sophistication. The social implications of glue technology are also interesting to consider. Someone who could make good glue would have been valuable to their community. They might trade glue for other goods or services. They might specialize somewhat in making hafted tools, becoming the go-to craftsperson for spears or axes. Technical knowledge creates social differentiation, specialists and generalists, experts and apprentices, all of which makes societies more complex and potentially more capable. Glue also enables art and decoration. Small beads or shells can be attached to clothing, to headbands, to ornaments. Pieces of bone or ivory can be inlaid into wood with glue, Feathers can be attached to create decorative or ceremonial objects. Glue is an enabling technology for creative expression, allowing artists to work with combinations of materials that couldn't otherwise be joined. From an evolutionary perspective, better tools mean better survival. Groups that could create effective hafted tools had advantages in hunting, in processing materials, in many survival tasks. These advantages could be significant, could make the difference between thriving and merely surviving. So glue, prosaic as it might seem, was actually quite important to human success. The persistence of birch bark tar technology across such long time spans, from possibly 200,000 years ago to historic times, with essentially the same basic process, shows that when humans develop an effective technology, they maintain it. This is cultural continuity, knowledge persisting not because it's encoded in genes, but because it's taught, generation after generation, valued enough to be preserved. Modern reconstruction experiments have shown how effective prehistoric glues were. Archaeologists have recreated birch bark tar using ancient methods, have used it to haft stone tools, and have tested these tools in actual use. The results show that hafted tools are dramatically more effective than unhafted ones, and that well-made glue bonds can withstand considerable force and use. The technology worked, and worked well. As you rest here in comfort, consider all the ways adhesives impact your modern life. Glues hold together so much of what surrounds you, from the construction of your home to the manufacturing of countless products. This ubiquitous technology has ancient roots, stretches back to those first humans who figured out how to make birch bark tar, who discovered that materials could be intentionally transformed into something new and useful. There's something profound in this realization that humans have been chemically transforming materials for hundreds of thousands of years. We think of chemistry as a modern science, but the fundamental practice, changing one substance into another through controlled processes, is ancient. Your prehistoric ancestors were practical chemists working with fire and plants and minerals to create new materials that served their needs. Sleep now, feeling connected to that long tradition of human innovation, the ability to see potential, to experiment, to learn, to teach, to pass knowledge forward through time. These capacities have served humanity well for hundreds of thousands of years. They're part of your inheritance, part of what makes you human. Rest peacefully, knowing that the innovative spirit that created the first glue continues in every human who solves problems, who creates, who makes things better through ingenuity and effort.